Hello and welcome back to another Milsurp HQ podcast. Thanks for joining us today as Kelly, our special guest, and I fill you in on everything about World War II reenacting from the sign-up to the wrap-up. And our fans have spoken and yelled at us for having too much video on the last episode, so apparently the majority of our listeners listen to us on their commutes. And so today we're back to an audio podcast, and we'll probably have a video companion, though, down the line. So first off, what's up, Kelly? How you doing tonight? And secondly, who's that special guest joining us on the show today?
I'm doing well, Tom, and I'm glad to be back. I know we had a little break there because we both got very busy, but this should be a great show. I think this will be a really interesting one because it's a topic I don't know much about. And to tell us about reenacting, we have the host of the World War Wisdom channel on YouTube. Thank you for joining us.
Woo!
Thanks so much for having me, guys. If you couldn't tell, I love talking about World War II reenacting and telling people all about it. So I'm really excited to do that today.
Awesome.
Oh yeah, we got plenty of questions for you. So you have a lot to share, and your channel is really cool. So I'm glad we got you on here. All right, we'll go ahead and get started with the two questions that we like to ask our guests each time they come on here. Now, these are pertaining to Milsurp firearms in particular. And those questions are, what kind of collector are you? Do you do a specific country, specific time period, manufacturer, anything like that? And then what is next up on your list?
So, to answer that, I think it's probably no surprise that I focus on U.S. World War II stuff. Not just firearms, but my whole collection of militaria and everything I do is centered around that. And to be honest, I don't have a huge Milsurp collection as of yet. I have an M1 Garand, a nice M1 carbine, a little pocket pistol, like a civilian model that's of that era. And I think next up on my list is a 1911. So I've been shopping around, but I've been building kind of slowly. I didn't get my first Milsurp until just a couple years ago, and I've kind of been adding one per year on top of that. So still building the collection.
Yeah, and I saw your video of you getting your Garand, and that was awesome. That put a tear in my eye. That was awesome.
Right? That was a long time coming. I had been wanting to get that forever. But yeah, I focused for most of my life on collecting gear and uniforms and stuff like that. And I didn't get into collecting the firearms until kind of just recently.
Nice. Well, there's plenty more to come. It's definitely a deep rabbit hole. I'm sure yours even deeper.
Yeah, absolutely.
And would you go CMP for the 1911 or shop for the specific one that you want?
I don't know. I think I thought about doing the CMP order, but I think it's just a little like with the CMP, you do the mail-in order, and that's great and everything for the M1 Garand because, in my opinion, they're such a good price. But I think the CMPs, or I think the 1911s from the CMP are they're priced a little higher, and I think I could find one maybe on the normal market that I don't have to take a gamble on that's the same price or cheaper than a rack grade from the CMP. So I've had a couple friends in the reenactment community that are selling, and I've been looking at a couple of those. So might have one of those pretty soon here.
Cool.
Nice. Yeah, that'll be a good addition for sure.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and if you're patient, you'll definitely there's a lot that you'll definitely find what you're looking for.
Right. It helps when you're not in a rush. And I did the same thing with my M1 carbine. I had let my friends know, I've got a wide network of reenactors and everything. So I just put the word out that if anyone sees one for sale to let me know. And eventually somebody did, and I got a really nice one for a pretty fair price. So I'm hoping that works the same way with the 1911, but time will tell.
Yeah, that seems like a cool avenue to have those other reenactors. They're into the collecting, and most of the time not holding on to junk. So you're gonna get something nice.
Yep.
Yeah, and we do all help each other out, pick stuff up for each other, send things to our group when we see something for a good price, even if we don't want it. So it works well for all of us.
That's awesome. All right, let's get into a little World War II reenacting now. And today we're going to try to cover a lot on this, and we'll definitely come across some topics that you've covered already on your site, World War Wisdom. So I appreciate you coming on today and reiterating some stuff for us here.
Oh, absolutely.
I didn't want you to think I didn't watch your stuff if I ask a question on something that you've answered already, but I've watched all your stuff. So
So is he
Oh, I appreciate
reenacting
that.
all this information?
yeah,
Yeah. This is a good format to kind of talk about it more in depth because I do so many shorts on my page and stuff. Sometimes kind of boil it down to the simplest form. So here I can ramble on a bit more about it.
yes, perfect. And we were very ambitious going into this, thinking like we would cover like all reenacting of all wars, but we quickly realized that that was just way too much for one show.
Right.
You know, there's a shitload of reenactments going on all over the world, and some go back to ancient Rome for their events. So we decided we'll just focus on the World War II.
Yeah, I think that's smart.
And here's a little history of reenacting I saw. Speaking of the Romans, the history of reenacting goes back to them, where hundreds of years ago they staged recreations of famous battles in their amphitheaters. I didn't know it went that far back. And there's extensive reenactments in 17th century England. They did it all the time. It was their television, I guess. And once America started getting into battles, a rich history of reenactment here started. And now today, there's so many large scale events. I was doing research and I couldn't believe how big some of these events are, with airplanes and tanks and all sorts of vehicles, and some that our guest today has attended. But first, I wanted to ask you a question that my 8-year-old son asked me when I told him about this topic. So this is an 8-year-old's question. He said, "What the heck is reenacting? Is it like paintball? And is it different from cosplay at a Comic-Con?" So, World War Wisdom, how do you fairly describe what a reenactment is? What do you tell
That
folks?
that is a great question. That's a very interesting question, and I was about 8 years old when I started to get involved in this kind of stuff, so it's never too
Wow.
early. But I'll hold off on that story for now. So,
Right.
as far as what reenacting is, we're just trying to put on a portrayal of what these guys, in my case, in World War II, what they would have looked like, what they would have gone through, what equipment that they used, and how they lived. And that part of history I think is so important to keep alive. You know, it's one thing to see something on a screen where you're getting a snippet of something like that, but to put yourself in the shoes of a soldier who is living in those conditions, you know, obviously we can't mimic it perfectly, but the best representation we can have, it really gives us a much better appreciation for what those guys went through at the time, and it's a great learning experience for us. And then additionally, when we do public events or when I share this stuff on my page, World War Wisdom, it gives many other people who, as us reenactors call the public, anyone who's not a reenactor, it helps educate them about what these guys were living through and everything. And I think it's a much more hands-on way to learn. A lot of people hear these stories from their grandparents about living in a foxhole and what kind of rifle they carried and stuff. But when you can go see it firsthand, and in my case, experience that myself, it really adds a personal touch to it.
Wow, that was a great answer. Holy
Yeah,
shit.
that was better than any Wikipedia answer or anything like that.
Yeah,
Well,
right.
thank you.
The Wikipedia definition is
You didn't
a
get that.
educational or entertainment activity in which mainly amateur hobbyists, which is kind of offensive, uh, and historical enthusiasts dress in historical uniforms and follow a plan to recreate aspects of an historical event or period. So that's a very technical definition. But you summed it all up there with, when you see it firsthand, it's a big difference than hearing about something. That's for sure.
Definitely. Definitely.
And I was thinking about that when my son asked, and I was like, I think a lot of people think reenacting is just cosplay and like just dressing up. But like in cosplay, once you put on the outfit, you're kind of done. But it seems like a reenacting, especially with these tactical events, you're just beginning. That's just the start of your day.
Right. That's absolutely true. And it is, I think it has a lot more depth than cosplay does. I don't know a lot about cosplaying, to be honest, but the costume, if you will, or the uniform, as we would say, is definitely a big part of it. But it's also not just the surface level thing. It's not just about when people look at you that you are, that you look like a World War II soldier. That's obviously a big part of it. But also it's that, your shirt's made of the correct material, that you're carrying all the right equipment inside your bag, stuff that people can't see. We're trying to mimic the experience for ourselves too. So I think that's a bit of a differentiation.
Cool, right? Yeah, there's more detail. Yeah, and I think cosplay is more about the costume and how much work they put into designing and making things look crazy. And
Right.
you're not trying to look crazy in your military gear.
No, I might sometimes, but I don't try.
And Tom, you mentioned tactical events. When we were doing research for this, we found like there was like pretty much two different types or styles of reenacting: the living history and the tactical events. What are the like big differences between those two?
Yeah, so I would actually split that even further into three categories. So these definitions can vary based on where you are. I know over in the UK, I think I hear people say tactical to refer to any event where they're recreating a battle. But here in the States, at least in the groups that I'm involved with, typically when we say we're doing a tactical reenactment, it means that there's nobody there watching it. It's just for the purpose of recreating the tactics and stuff on our own. Usually we're out in the woods by ourselves. Nobody's coming to watch the battle. It just plays out naturally, and we're trying to live as soldiers would have at the time. So that's what we would call a tactical. And then we have, on the other side of the spectrum, living history events. So that's where there's no type of battle at all. You usually set up an encampment, or maybe set up like you would be living on the line during World War II. And then the public, as I said, so any spectators, people who are interested in this stuff, can come check it out. And we'll put up displays for them to look at and teach them about the history, what equipment these guys had, what battles they were involved in, and what we're portraying at that event, and also some of the weaponry and stuff like that. And then, kind of in between a tactical and a living history event, we have public battles. So those ones are very popular. Most of the biggest events in the United States are public battles. So that usually has a portion where we're set up in an encampment, just like a living history event. But then at some point during the event, all the reenactors kind of go to a battlefield, and there's a staged scenario that we kind of act out for the public who's there watching, so they can get a sense of some of the tactics, see how the movements work, see some of the vehicles and equipment in action, and get kind of a demonstration of how the weapons work and everything. So that's what I would break it up into, those three categories. And most events that I've done fall into one of those.
Do you prefer one over the other? I would assume you prefer getting your hands dirty and getting in there. The last one.
No, I do. I do for sure. Um, and honestly, it depends more for me on the specific event and what we're portraying and how it's run than the category. So I've been to some living history events that are really well done. I've been to some tacticals that are really well done. And I'd say the tacticals are maybe some of my favorite. That's where I get the best footage for sure. And that's where I have a lot of fun with my buddies. But I would say, even though I prefer those a lot of the time, a good public event is still better than a bad tactical.
And are you able to use blanks? I know that, are they always required, or are they sometimes banned, or what's the deal with using blanks and blank adapters?
Right. So that's absolutely the case. We're typically using blanks. Most of the weapons we use are real, for the most part, unmodified weapons that could fire live ammunition, but we're loading them with blanks. And if it's a auto loader, a semi or full auto, you need to have some kind of adapter on there just to get the gas pressure to cycle those blanks. But yes, for any of those battle reenactments that we do or for weapons demonstrations, they're all done with blank ammo.
And no one's running around with bayonets and swords, right? Let me clear that up.
No, nobody's running around with bayonets and swords usually, but they actually do make rubber bayonets and rubber fighting knives. And I
Whoa.
have been at reenactments where people will get into hand-to-hand combat with those rubber implements. I've even seen things.
That's cool.
You don't see this as often at World War II reenactments, but I know some guys who do World War I reenacting, and they get real creative. They'll have rubber trench clubs and rubber shovels and things like that they'll smack each other with.
That sounds fun.
Yeah.
So how did you get into this?
So I've always been interested in the military and military equipment and that type of thing. I always, as a little tiny kid, loved wearing camo. And at some point, my dad took me to the Army Navy store, and I bought a bunch of Army stuff, and I thought it was so cool. And
Are you too
then
young for G.I. Joe?
I had plenty of G.I. Joes.
Oh,
I love that stuff. I love G.I. Joes. Even as a tiny little kid, I loved watching like military shows and stuff like that. Anything on TV related to the military. I was watching that and playing military video games. All of that played a role. But it really came together when I met a good friend of mine in elementary school who also was interested in that stuff, and his dad was a World War
Wow.
II reenactor. So as a kid, I think he took us for the first time to a local parade, I think it was. That was a common thing for reenactors to do in the city where I lived, be involved in the local parades and vehicles and such. So I think I was 8 years old, and I got some of the uniform parts, and they let me borrow some, and we rode around in this parade. And from there on, the rest is history. I went to a bunch more events with my friend and his dad. And then as I got older, got a little bit out of it in high school and college, but then got back in and joined a group on my own. And now I go to plenty of events, as you see if you look at my page. So,
Wow. Were you a big gamer at all? Did that have any influence on you?
yeah, that did have some. I remember as a kid playing like some of the first Call of Duty games. And I think even at that time, I might have been too young to play them. Maybe I was watching my brother play them when I was in, like first grade or whatever. But yeah, that definitely played some role.
Yeah,
And
in
that
the Milsurp collecting world, that's video
Yep.
games plays a huge role.
Part of what got me
Definitely.
into it.
Yeah, that's so great. I love to hear that too, because I feel like when I first started getting into reenacting and stuff, some of the older guys thought of like they looked down on people who got into it for that reason. Like, oh, that kid, he just likes the video games. But now I think most people with an interest in military history or firearms or anything like that can attribute it to some extent to the popularity of video games like that.
Yeah, the older generation shits on it a little bit, but yeah, like you said, it's becoming the majority at this point.
Absolutely.
And it wasn't like we looked at the games and thought it was cool to kill people. It was more like, wow, this is like when I first stormed the beach of Normandy, I thought it was fake. There's no way we stormed this beach with those guys up there with the machine guns looking down at us just like this. And, when I eventually looked into it, it was like, holy shit. And we didn't all get
Right.
killed?
Right. And that's kind of the same experience we try to have at World War II reenactments, just like a video game where you're putting yourself in the shoes of those soldiers. At a reenactment, of course, it's even more realistic, and you can have those recreations. Like, oh my God, if they were firing real rounds at me right now, we would all be
Yeah.
toast. How did those guys do this?
Yeah.
Crazy.
And so, did you have like any relatives in the military that kind of helped spur this, or did you want to be in the military at any point, or is this like a separate interest from that?
It's kind of separate from that. I did have some relatives who were in the military, not in World War II, and not who were in any significant combat, at least that relatives that were close to me. Both my grandfathers were in the military, but one served in the Navy during peacetime, and one served during the Korean War and was stationed in Germany. So maybe that had something to do with it, some small amount, but that really wasn't a major motivator for me like it is for a lot of the other reenactors I talk to.
Okay. Yeah, there just seems to be a common connection there a lot of the time. So
Right.
And then, of course, I'm sure Saving Private Ryan is something that you've watched your fair share of times.
Certainly. Absolutely, yeah. I've seen that, especially like the Omaha Beach scene. I can't even tell you how many times I've watched that through.
Yeah.
oh yeah.
And what these games and movies end up doing for me is it makes me go look further, and then now I'm buying books, I'm watching documentaries on it. It leads me into learning a lot about everything, and it looks, and I definitely didn't want to be there. I'm not jealous of being in the war. I want to look into reenacting, not fighting actual war,
Exactly, yeah, I'm in the same boat.
because every first person story I hear, it's terrible. No one had
Yeah.
fun.
No kidding.
Right. Right. And that's what makes it so interesting to learn about in a sense. But I do get questions like that a lot. Like, oh, I'm sure you would go back there if you could. And no, not really. I'm glad that we don't have to go through what those guys went through, you know?
And this is a sanity check question here. Would you rather fight the Germans on that front or the Japanese on the islands front?
Oh my God. Well, again, I would love to not have to do either, but if I had to make the pick, I would want to be on the European side of things. I don't know
Okay.
who would want to choose to,
Okay, he's not crazy.
Yeah, so one day some crazy guy's gonna say the Japanese islands.
right. That's so funny. You know, I have a magazine from World War II. I think it's a Life or a Yank magazine, and there's a cartoon on the back. And it shows on the left side, there's a soldier sitting in Europe, and he's dreaming of a girl dancing on a beach in the Pacific. And then on the right, there's a guy sitting on the beach in the Pacific, and he's dreaming of being in Paris with a bunch of French girls. So I think at the time, the guys were thinking the same thing, like, oh, would I rather be over there fighting the other side of the war?
Right.
No, probably not.
Probably not, no.
All right, so let's get into some of these reenactment events. With some of these engagements drawing in hundreds of people, you'd expect a lot more chaos, but I was looking at lots of videos, and if you look at these events, especially the large ones when they have vehicles involved, you can see that they're not fly by the seat of your pants operations, and they all seem to be pretty well planned out. And
Right.
we took a closer look at the World War II D-Day events at D-Day Conneaut. I hope I'm saying that correctly. The D-Day
Yes.
Ohio event each summer. So I'm going to use that at times as a frame of reference today as we talk about some rules and the process of being like a full participant, because that's the one I read up on. So let's get started with some pre-event items like the signing up and some rules and requirements and some gear, what we're bringing, all the fun stuff before we shoot. So I'm sincerely interested in joining one of these days. I'm afraid to have the wrong gear. I'm afraid to do the wrong thing. So Kelly and I are gonna like bombard you with some questions here and
Sounds
about your
good.
experiences. So we don't look like fools when we show up.
Right.
Show up with my Glock, my shotgun.
So yeah, I looked at the D-Day Conneaut one that's been going on for 25 years in Ohio, and they strictly do the World War II European Theater of Operations on the Normandy invasion of June 6, 44. Right? It's a 2-day event, but they do that one day, and
Right.
they draw. I saw they draw over 1,500 reenactors a year and over 45,000 spectators.
Yes.
Wow.
Yeah, it's a huge event.
Like any other thing, they started small, but 1,500. Wow. So let's get to the sign up. This sign up process for these guys is you have to be 18 to participate in the battle, 16 for the living history stuff. They're large enough that they have a living history area and the battles. And they have you have to email, you have to check in, and then on the day of the event, you can't walk up and buy any tickets. So is all that normal for an event?
I would say no, that is not normal. I think that event has grown to be so big and well known that they have to kind of run a tight ship in that regard. But even that event, I've gone to that many, many years. So it's good that we're talking about that. But for example, you mentioned now you have to be 18 to be in the battles. And I think they're pretty strict on that. I think they might have a caveat that if you're 16 or older, you can go on with a parent if they're with you. But my first year that I did one of the battles there, I was 12 years old, I think, or maybe 13. But I was definitely not 18. Of course, I didn't have a weapon or anything, but I was just a medic kind of running around on the sidelines. And that was just for one of the smaller airborne reenactments that they do there. But certainly they would not allow me to do that today. And back in those days, there was no kind of sign up in advance, I don't think. Maybe there was your unit or your commanding officer of your unit would send in a count of how many people were coming, something along those lines. But it definitely wasn't like today where you have to register months in advance. You have to indicate what days you're going to be there. And I think now, even if you haven't attended it in the past, you might have to submit photos of the gear you're wearing and everything so they can make sure you're squared away. So now it is
Wow.
definitely, like I said, there's a lot of boxes to check before you can just show up. But I think that's kind of the result of it being a larger event. You don't see that at all of the events that I attend.
So what would be like an average event? You just kind of sign up with your unit and they know you and get you squared away, or you just kind of show up and see what happens, or just somewhere in between.
Yeah, most of them are somewhere in that middle ground. There's usually some type of sign up in advance, but it really does depend. I've been to some where you have to submit a form in advance just at some point before you show up. Usually, the registration form will close a week before, and then as long as you filled that out, you're good to go. I've done others where pretty much there's no registration process. You just show up, and as long as somebody knows you're going to be there, you're all set. And then I've been to some where maybe it's just a Facebook group for the event. And as long as you're in the group and have talked to them in that Facebook group, you're good to go. So some are very informal and some are extremely regimented. Most are somewhere in the middle where there's some kind of process, but maybe it isn't as intense as D-Day, Ohio.
And do you have to be with a unit or a group, or can you just be like, can you just kind of show up on your own and get shoehorned in somewhere?
That varies by event. For D-Day, they do require you to be with a unit, but I think a lot of the units there, because of that, are pretty accepting of new people coming in with them. But the one event that I go to is called Lauer Farms, and that one is also in Ohio. It's in the fall every year. And I remember the first time I went to that event, I was somewhat new to the area. Wasn't part of a group yet, and I just signed myself up and showed up without knowing anyone. And by the time I left the event, I had met so many other reenactors from the area that I was already joining groups and setting up plans to attend with them next year. But there certainly are ones where you can show up by yourself. I would say your best bet is to join a group, though, because usually they can help get you organized, help get your uniform squared away in advance so you don't show up, wearing the wrong stuff and look silly at the event. But there are times when you can show up on your own.
Yeah, I would think that like reenactment group only events would be easier to make sure everyone's on the right page because they're already in a group. And once you open it up to the public, there's a lot of wild cards. So
Right. And a lot of them will kind of enforce that. Like, if you want to come by yourself and you don't know anyone, that's fine, but we're going to assign you to one of these groups that we know so they can kind of help you get acclimated and make sure you have all the stuff leading up to the event.
yeah, I believe the Conneaut one says that your commanding officer will return the email after you sign up and
Right.
tell you what unit you're in.
Right. That's correct.
And is this something that World War II veterans enjoy and promote and like participate in and show up for, or is it something that they think they're being mocked?
It absolutely is something that we are doing to honor them, and they are generally very appreciative. D-Day
Cool.
Ohio in particular, um, I mean, now we don't get many World War II veterans for a number of reasons. You know, a lot of them are getting older and aren't in good health, and unfortunately, many have passed. But in previous years, I mean, there was a huge veterans program with sometimes I think over 100 World War II veterans who had come from all over the country just to attend this event. And I just posted a video a few days ago about a veteran. His name is Arden Earl, and unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. But he actually landed on Omaha Beach on D-Day. He was with the 29th Infantry, and he saw combat there. I think he took some shrapnel in his arm during the battle, and he would come to the event every year for a number of years. And the one year, 2015, he actually put on a uniform, got onto a
Oh,
landing craft
cool.
just like he did back in 1944, and landed on the beach with the reenactors.
Wow.
That's
That's
really
awesome.
cool.
Yeah, it was amazing, and he's not the only guy to do that. There's another veteran named Rich Pylon who took part in the battles, and there have been other times where they'll load up like a little vehicle, like a Jeep or a tracked weasel, it's called, and drive some veterans around on the beach during the reenactment. So they're definitely involved, and usually they love this stuff. They love that we're keeping alive the things that they did and what they went through, and we love to hear from them. We'll be asking them questions and everything about is what I'm doing right? Is this what you did back then?
We're running out of them.
Oh, I know it's a real shame. But at that event they are treated like celebrities. It's really
That's
incredible to
awesome.
see.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. Some old people could be ornery and think you're mocking them or playing games. But from what I've seen, though, they look professional enough that they're not going to think that. Shouldn't think that.
Definitely. And nobody could blame a veteran who didn't want to see something like that, especially the battle portion where there might be a lot of gunfire and stuff like that. Nobody could blame somebody who didn't want to see that. But for the most part, the veterans I've interacted with have really enjoyed coming to those events and even, like I said, in some cases, participating themselves.
Love that. All right, so we sign up, get accepted, and then it's time to start getting ready for the event. But first off, the events that are like fully planned out ahead of time, do you know who is the person that plans what's going on, or you hear it to 10th hand information about what's going on that day?
Right. So the beauty of being a military reenactment group is that we have a rank structure. So typically
Ah,
the within our own group we have a rank structure, and then the leader of my group will report to an allied commander, and that commander will report to the event coordinator. So there really is an organized structure there, partially just because we all have ranks that we're portraying and we're trying to represent a military organization. So typically, the people with some level of responsibility for planning get those higher ranks, and that helps us kind of stay organized. So typically, we get information that trickles down through our unit commander, but oftentimes they will also put out a lot of resources leading up to events, so we can kind of understand what we're getting into in advance.
cool. Like real military, a need to know basis.
Yeah.
Right.
And do any reenactment groups ever get to suggest anything to the leaders? Like, hey, how about we're a flanking team and we go and do this and that? Or do you think everyone just accepts this is the plan?
Yeah, generally, for those ones that are very planned out like that, a lot of times the unit commanders after each year, because a lot of these events have been going on for many years, they'll submit after action reports to the leadership, so they get an understanding of what went well at that event, what didn't. not just in terms of the battle, but in terms of just how the event was run overall. And then they'll try to incorporate some of that in the next year. Now, for something like
Cool.
the D-Day reenactment, we don't have a ton of flexibility because we're kind of reenacting as
Right.
best we can the exact events that took place. So we can't say, oh, maybe we should have the Germans attacking us this year,
Right.
But
Yeah.
we can definitely have some small changes to the battle that make things run a bit more smoothly. And there is communication going on even during the battle. The command staff will have people stationed on the beach with radios, trying to plan everything out so that you don't just get one group that gets off their boats and runs right up to the Germans and knocks them out in 5 minutes. They kind of stagger things and have a plan going on, and they'll say, hold here. I think in some of my videos that I shot at the event from last year, you can see they were using smoke signals. So they would tell us all the order of the colored smokes they were going to pop. And each time a new smoke color came up, we would move up to the next set of obstacles and barricades. So kind of a signal to keep everyone on the same page and make sure the battle has a nice pace and progresses nicely. Because like you mentioned, there are sometimes tens of thousands of people in that crowd watching. So we try to put on a good show.
That's awesome.
And for these, is it you do it kind of rain or shine? Because I mean, they didn't get to go home when it was raining, or do some people kind of bug out and only show up for the sunny ones?
Some people definitely do bug out, and I've had events get canceled because of the rain. That's never something that really bothers me. I'll put a raincoat on and throw a shelter half over my head or something and make it work. But there have been times we have to delay things or cancel a battle or an entire event just because of the weather.
Yeah, I could see if it gets real muddy and tanks tearing up the land or something like that.
Exactly. That is sometimes a concern. And sometimes, especially at D-Day, we have the opposite. It's too bright and sunny outside to the point where sometimes we're charging up the beach in 90 or 100-degree weather in August. And that can make it really tough on us,
Yep.
especially when we try to wear the equipment that guys actually wore on D-Day when it was more like 50 or 60 degrees in the morning when they were landing, and we're trying to wear that running around in 90-degree weather. It can cause some issues for the reenactors.
Yeah, I bet.
Well, so you're saying in some ways you guys had it tough than the soldiers storming the beach. Is that what you're saying?
Oh, definitely. Yeah,
Right.
we get thirsty and we have to sit down and take a break. It's really grueling out there.
I was curious do they ever have PA systems for playing in extra sound effects, battle sounds, and like boundary marker? Like, is there a whole rigged up boundary and course and sound effects and all that? I
That's a
guess that's
great
modern,
question.
but
I've never seen one where they play sound effects, but at big events like D-Day, they will have a PA system where they will kind of narrate the battle. So since there's
oh
so
yeah,
many people there watching and it's very far away, it can be hard to see. They will explain while the battle's happening, like, oh, at this time in the morning, the 16th Infantry Division was just hitting the beach and met heavy resistance. And that will kind of give the spectators a better idea of what they're seeing. And at that one, they do have strict boundaries that you can't go outside of, so the crowd doesn't get too close to us and vice versa. But some of them, like I said, smaller events are typically more relaxed. They might have one microphone where they will give an intro before the battle, and that's about it. It just depends.
So do they have like a mock press or reporters or war correspondents or anything like that?
They certainly do. And depending on the event, like we were talking about PA systems, I know for D-Day, it's a modern PA system. Obviously, it would be very difficult to cover that whole crowd of tens of thousands with a vintage PA system. But for smaller events like at Lauer Farms, I think for that event last year, we did set up a World War II era loudspeaker, and they just did the announcements through that using period equipment. And then we do often have people who are war correspondents as their impression, and they're often shooting on film cameras from the era, shooting both stills and video, or maybe they're even shooting on modern cameras that are disguised. And that'll be the impression they often go with, is a war correspondent, so they don't look out of place taking those pictures. And it is also accurate. There were correspondents like that right on the front lines covering the action. So we do portray that.
Yeah, I was gonna ask if they frowned upon people filming or anything like that.
Yeah, the events that I've been to generally don't have a problem as long as, like I said, you're discreet and respectful about it. Of course, sometimes you will maybe get people who are pulling their phones out during the battle to record or things like that. They do frown upon that for sure. But if you have a setup that's discreet,
So you shouldn't
and
take a phone
especially
call in the middle of battle?
right, unless you're taking that call on a World War II era BC 1000 radio or something like that, I would dissuade you from taking a phone call in the middle of the battle. And in my case, I know the event coordinators have seen some of my videos and things like that and responded positively. So it's not like I'm sneaking it around them or something. They just, understand that I'm doing it respectfully. I'm not pulling out the phone or carrying a big modern camera. So it usually works out pretty smoothly.
And we talked a bit about how to join a squad. Like the Conneaut place will put you on a squad, and you said you showed up, and then by the end of the day you had squad offers. But does the event ever ask for specific units? I guess for the storming of Normandy, they know the units they're looking for. Do they ever ask for specific units, and then and if you're not that, they don't accept you?
Right. So typically they will have a list of accepted units that are historically accurate for that scenario. And you have to kind of adopt the impression of one of those units. So you have to kind of fall into one of the set categories. Now, there are groups that will, let's say they represent an element that was not at D-Day and they want to come to the event. Usually with just a couple small changes to their uniform and stuff, they can look the part of one of the groups that was there. Maybe they have to sew on some new shoulder patches or something. But it's typically not a big issue to adopt a new impression just for that event. And that's what a lot of groups will do.
I didn't even think of that. Yeah, you could just change.
Right, right. And sometimes there is specific equipment that you need to get, or you might have to buy some different boots that if you represent a group that wouldn't have had a certain, they are strict about the gear you have and everything. You might have to change some stuff out, but generally it's doable to change your impression like that.
And if you just collected high-ranking officer uniforms, are you now a high-ranking officer when you reenact?
I would say typically no.
Ah,
Usually they frown upon that type of thing, and the officer positions are usually reserved for like the group leaders and people who want to help organize things. They kind of don't want people dressed as officers who aren't actually helping out. And that's also to keep the ratio of enlisted men to officers somewhat accurate. So
ah,
obviously they don't want
That makes
20
sense.
officers showing up for 100 men. They might only want 5 officers commanding those 100 men.
oh, cool. Yeah, that was a question I was really curious of when I've seen that a lot of places, like you said, there's a rank hierarchy that they follow. But what if you just have, you come as an officer, are you now an officer? Oh, well.
And if you do really have your heart set on doing that, there are ways you can find impressions that work with being an officer.
Maybe be a
But yeah, they
demoted or a
generally.
disgraced officer?
Or a logistics officer in the back.
Right.
Right. But
And
yeah, and I
for
don't want to make it sound like these people who are officers or who are portraying officers actually have a ton of power and authority and think that they earn some valor award and they get to command people. No, it's usually just they're helping plan. So
It works out well that if you see an officer, you know he probably has information.
right,
You know
right,
who the go ask the officer. It works with the whole system. I agree.
exactly.
But
for like
I
the
still might show up as an officer though. Just saying, I'm gonna.
all right, Sergeant Tom, take us into battle.
Salute me.
They'll think you're a German spy trying to throw off our troops.
Speaking of the Germans, for these events, do they like try and have like correct ratios of how many troops for each side, or is it just kind of like region dependent, like oh, in Ohio or whatever, like you were saying, there's like 10 American groups and like 3 German groups, so they always need the German groups there, but sometimes you only need 6 American groups or 3 American groups.
Right. Yeah, they do try to keep, I would say, usually an even split or at least a historically accurate split of Germans to Americans. And for some events that don't have a set scenario, maybe they will tailor the battles and stuff to make do with what kind of breakup they have. If it's a battle reenactment and we only have 20 Germans and a couple hundred Americans, they might put the Allies on the attack for that one and have the Germans dug in a bunker or something. But typically, we do get a pretty even turnout of Axis and Allied reenactors.
Would you ever have a side that has few people get killed and then like respawn at a later time to make up for the lack of people?
Yeah, definitely. We have done that for sure. And typically at these public reenactments where people are watching, the rule is mostly just to kind of respawn in a way that isn't noticeable. So a lot of times, if we're in need of more people, a medic will maybe drag you out of sight and you'll sit there for a minute and then you'll run back in with the next wave of guys
Ah, cool.
and we're all wearing the same uniform. Nobody in the crowd is going to say, "Oh, that's the exact guy who I just saw die over there." It's pretty discreet. But yes, that certainly does happen. And at those tactical reenactments that I mentioned, where we're kind of out doing our own thing and nobody's watching, the rule there is usually that if you get hit, you have to lay in place for 10 or 15 minutes or until the fighting moves away
Wow.
from your position. And then you walk back to kind of your headquarters or behind the lines. And then from there, you can kind of filter back in with your
Uh,
squad after a bit of time has passed.
like paintball or airsoft, similar
Exactly.
respawn.
Yeah, very similar system.
All right, and here's a few general questions here. How many times do events do multiple scenarios in a day, or is it mostly just one large one?
That's quite common, actually. The public battles that I go to, like D-Day Conneaut, has been adding scenarios ever since I started going there. So I think when that first started out, it was just that big beach battle, and that was it. They would do one battle and everyone would go home. But now it's progressed to the point where they have the invasion. They do it 3 times on 3 separate days so people can see it. And then they have other
Oh,
battles
wow.
like a tank battle on the beach. They have multiple different airborne scenarios representing different airborne battles that took place in Normandy behind enemy lines.
Whoa.
So it's really grown. And so now I think they have, on some of the days, maybe 4 or 5 battles going on at different points throughout the day.
Dang.
Oh, wow. And I like that 3 times doing the D-Day invasion. You can mix it up a little bit. Maybe the left side runs ahead first. First time, and
Yeah.
try some
Yeah, it
different
is.
things.
Yeah, it definitely is a bit different. And I think people had mixed opinions about that at first. It actually started because of COVID. They had to limit the amount of people that were there every day. So they had to do it 3 times to make sure everyone got to see the battle happening.
Right.
But I guess it worked so well, they've just kept it around. And it's sometimes nice for the reenactors too, because there have been times where one day maybe it's too choppy out in the lake. We coming off Lake Erie on landing craft. So it used to be
Awesome.
that if it was too rough and we were only doing one battle, too bad you don't get to go on the landing craft that year. But nowadays, since we're doing it 3 times, we can pretty much count on there being at least one of the days that'll be nice enough for us to use the boats.
And maybe you can mix it up. You could be the medic the one time, and then the second time you're just the standard infantry.
Right.
It could be
People
fun
do
too.
switch things up like that for sure. Some people, I mentioned, they have multiple other battle scenarios too. So some people will come and do a US airborne impression, for example, and maybe just do those smaller battles that involve the airborne guys. But a lot of times I will bring both uniforms. So in the morning, I'll go over and do the small airborne battle. Then I'll switch out my uniform for a standard infantry kit. And then in the afternoon, I'll go do the beach battle with a new impression.
That's cool.
Yeah, that sounds fun. You're not just doing the same shit over and over and over.
Exactly. Exactly. It gives you a little variety, and it keeps it interesting.
So are the battles like always like historically accurate? I mean, obviously D-Day, we know who the winner is, but for like the winners and losers, they always kind of tend to go the way they really went, or there's like some improvisation as far as like tactics or what goes on.
That's a good question. When we do the tactical battles that I mentioned, those are usually totally unplanned. So whoever wins and loses, it's not planned in advance. We might launch
Oh wow.
in a fake attack and try to take out the enemy, and it's kind of the honor system for knowing if you're shot or not. But we'll catch them by surprise and actually get to plan out our own tactics and make a battle plan and stick to that. And then for the public battles, if they're representing a specific battle, then that'll usually be totally choreographed. But for some of them, like that event I mentioned called Lauer Farms that I keep coming back to, the public battles there aren't based around a specific battle typically. So a lot of times there, they might say uh, the Allies will win the morning battle, and then they'll do another battle for the public in the afternoon and let the Axis side win that. And outside of that, it's usually mostly unscripted.
Wow, that's awesome.
You mentioned one thing that I was gonna get to later, but I definitely wanted to know, like, how do you know when you get hit, or is it just like you saw a guy and like, oh, you saw the blank fire flash and like, yeah, that probably hit me, or obviously if they like
Right.
jump in the foxhole behind you and say, stabby stab, and you got.
Exactly. And it honestly, it can be very tough to tell whether or not you got hit. And especially at those public events, that's really not a large part of it. We're more just putting on a show. We're trying to show off the weapons and do the tactics. Whether or not you would have actually been hit doesn't matter as much. So for those ones, you pretty much just get hit. Maybe if you run out of ammunition, you'll think now's a good time for me to get hit. Or if you're outside of your foxhole and you hear a machine gun burst, you can assume, okay, I would have gotten hit then. But you're really just doing what looks good to the crowd. But at those tactical events, there's nobody watching. So we're kind of trying to call our own hits. And for that, exactly like you said, if you see somebody shoot at you and you see that muzzle flash, you know that you probably would have gotten it. And other times, if you're maybe just out in the open and you get ambushed, you can assume, okay, there's 5 of us here. They would have gotten at least 3 of us. So let's 3 of us will lay down and 2 of us can stick around. But it's kind of just the honor system like that.
What do people get mad though if you don't die and start yelling across the field? I shot you.
I have I have seen that happen. And it's funny to me because in my mind that is so far from the point of the reenactment. Like whether or not you lived or didn't, has nothing to do with the point of why we're there, to recreate history and put ourselves in the shoes of these soldiers. But people do get caught up in the moment, and they will say, "Oh, I shot you over there. Hey, you, I would have got you." I never get caught up in that type of thing. I just think it's silly, but it definitely does happen more than I'd like to admit at events.
Yeah, you can just yell back, "You suck at shooting."
You
Yeah,
missed. I could see happening
exactly.
where like I'm gonna like go down, like I got shot, but then the guy next to me goes down. So it's like,
Yeah,
oh wait, he didn't shoot both of us.
I was thinking about that too. Like, what
Right.
if a machine gun bursts and like all like 10 guys lay down? Like, oh wait, shit, no, not all of us.
Right.
Yeah,
Maybe
that can
maybe one of us has
definitely
to get up.
happen.
Yeah. And like,
Right.
can you fake just being wounded and just limping at least?
Yes. Yeah,
All right, that's
sometimes
good.
at events they'll actually give you a wound card. So they'll give you a card
Whoa.
in a sealed envelope, and you'll put that in like maybe your bandage pouch or something. And then if I get in that situation where I think I got hit, I'll lay down and I'll pull out that card, and it'll tell me what injury I should portray.
Oh, that's kind of cool.
So a lot of times it might just say you're wounded you took shrapnel to the head, or you got a glancing blow. You can stay in the battle with medical aid. Or it might say you're totally dead. Just stay where you are. So that keeps it interesting. I really like when they use a system like that.
And have you been to one where they use the real blood? Well, real blood. They use fake blood and like real wounds, so that the medic has to like bandage it up and fix it.
I don't think I've been to one where they do stuff like that. I think a lot of people shy away from that because maybe they don't want to ruin their uniform or something along those lines. And definitely, I would say that's frowned upon at public events. But I did actually have a time when I was at D-Day Conneaut on the beach, and I was portraying a medic. And of course, us medics, we're just playing the role. I don't actually have any kind of real medical training. That's not true for all of us, but in my case, that's true. But we still try to check in on the guys. It can be dangerous. People get their fingers blown off and get cuts and all other kinds of stuff. So I did come across one guy who had put fake blood all over himself without telling anyone. And I ran up to him and saw him covered in blood. And for a split second, I thought he was actually seriously injured.
Oh
And
no.
it took me a minute. It wasn't until I saw his buddy next to him, like sitting there laughing. And I was like, oh my gosh, this guy's just faking it. But yeah, usually they tell you you're not allowed to use fake blood at those public events.
Yeah.
Well, that rolls perfectly into our next topic, which is the safety aspect of these events. And so we had
Yep.
a list of questions kind of about this same topic pretty much. I guess the most obvious one, the first off one is like, how do they check ammo or like firearm safety and stuff like that? Do they check all the rounds? Do they provide the rounds? Or what about that one bozo that forgets that he was at the shooting range last weekend or whatever?
Right. And thanks to the whole Alec Baldwin case, everybody, the average Joe knows about blanks and how they could be mixed
Right.
up. And so how's that
Exactly.
work?
Yeah, so I'll start by talking about how they kind of the oversight in terms of blanks and stuff. So typically we bring our own blanks. That's been the case for all the events that I've been to, and the checks can really vary. So some events kind of delegate that to a person in your unit that they'll maybe have one guy in each unit who's a safety officer and is in charge of looking at everyone's blank ammunition, making sure that they have blanks that will work in their weapon, that they're not anything that's dangerous. And others, they'll have when you check in, you have to show them your ammo. But in my experience, they don't look at all of your rounds. They'll typically ask you to pull out a couple from your equipment at random
Uh-oh.
and look at them, and then they will check the blank adapter on your rifle and make sure that's set up properly where it's not going to go flying off and hit somebody. But I do sometimes wish there was a little more oversight. Generally, reenactors are really good about that. Of course, before any event, I'm going through my blanks for the
Right, but like you
millionth
said,
time,
accidents
even though.
happen.
But yeah, it does sometimes worry you. Accidents do happen. Now, I don't think I know of any times in the past where somebody's actually fired a live round during an accident or during a reenactment by mistake. I think maybe I've heard one or two.
Oh, wow. Well, the rule of thumb is you're not supposed to ever even directly aim at someone. Is that correct?
That is correct. But
So
still,
it could have been
at
some
an
live
event
rounds
like
that did get whipped around. You
right,
never know.
right. So you do try to aim off to the side, but still, if there was a live round that made it in the batch, I wouldn't feel comfortable with somebody shooting right next to me either.
Yeah.
But it's at least better.
You said you had
But
heard of
typically,
one or two instances.
yeah, I have. I think
Uh-oh.
I was trying to recall. I think I have heard of an instance where that happened by mistake, but I was gonna say more often it's something like, um, the blank adapter wasn't set up properly and got shot off as a projectile and hit somebody, or there was something stuck in the barrel and they didn't know, and when they fired a blank, that fired out. So a lot of times it involves a projectile that isn't actually a bullet in these instances you hear about, which are rare, but they do happen. And I've even heard of times with Civil War reenacting and other events where they're using muskets, people will forget to remove the ramrod from their barrel and
Oh,
fire a ramrod at somebody, and obviously that can be extremely dangerous.
I
So,
still don't
not
know
a
how they do
concern.
that. I don't know how they do that.
Right, right.
You ram it in
So
and then you
that,
just quickly do it, I guess, but that's so crazy.
I guess. I'm glad that is not a concern for World War II reenacting. We don't exactly use ramrods, but for Civil War and Rev War reenactors, that's definitely on their radar, I'm sure.
Oh yeah. And is blank firing like allowed at all events or required, or are some of them like only gas guns or the BFONGs they're called, blank firing only non-guns?
Right. At events in the US, it's typically if they allow any kind of shooting, then they allow blanks. I've never heard of one that limits the type you can use. Generally, as long as your firearm is set up properly to accept the blanks and it's nothing dangerous, they won't say, oh, you can only use a gas gun, you can only use a BFONG. They're typically, it's all okay or none of it is,
Yeah.
in my
Right.
experience.
All right. So with that being said, how safe overall would you say these events are? If someone asked you, said, "Oh, my 18-year-old's going," say 1 to 10, 10 being the safest, 1 being your handle blow off probably, or you'll get run over by a
So
tank.
if 10 is the safest, I would say it's probably an 8 or 9, especially compared to most other hobbies and sports. It is, you're taking the same level of risk as if you're
Right.
mountain biking or doing anything of the sort.
Right.
There's some
Some heart
inherent risk
attacks.
when yeah, when you're dealing with black powder, or not black powder, but when there's explosions going off and you're dealing with firearms, there can be some risk involved, but most of the injuries I've seen have been due to somebody's own negligence in some aspect. So as long as you are paying attention to what you're doing, and you know what you're doing, I'd say it's very safe.
And what would be your worst fear then of all the things?
I would say a live round is definitely up there, or some kind of
Yeah.
projectile, or also just somebody shooting a blank far too close to me where it could injure me, because blanks, they are safe, but within a certain distance, they can still do some damage.
And are y'all wearing ear
Right.
pro and eye pro for all of this, or since that's not historically accurate?
Yeah.
Generally, no to eye pro. Ear pro, I always wear ear pro, and I encourage others to do the same, but I do know a lot of people who don't wear any sort of ear protection.
Oof. Have fun with that.
And that is definitely a concern, getting your eardrums blown out.
Yeah. Do they
That does
supply them
happen.
there? Do they have like spare earplugs and helmets if you need or anything?
Typically, that would happen within your group level. So an event usually wouldn't have extra stuff like that. But if you need to borrow something and you let somebody know in advance, like a helmet, you probably could. And for earplugs, usually somebody around will have brought some extra just in case.
Sounds like you need a good group, and then you have a bunch of friends that you could
Yeah.
share things with and get things done.
Definitely. And that plays into the safety aspect as well. If you join a good group where everyone knows each other and everyone kind of knows, you have some confidence in the fact that the guy next to you isn't some Yahoo who's gonna shoot his gun right next to your
Right.
ear. The guys in your group are doing what they're supposed to do and policing their own stuff. That definitely helps with the safety aspect and with your level of confidence that you won't have an incident.
Right.
So, of the things you've seen, what's been the worst? You said some cuts and bruises and whatnot. Anyone fall and break their arm or something like that, or fall off a vehicle, or have a heart attack, or step on the pyrotechnics or anything like that?
I'm trying to think of things that I remember at D-Day every year, we have a lot of heat casualties. So people having, passing out due to the heat or throwing up, anything of that nature. We get a lot of that. I know there's been some people, I think somebody had a dislocated shoulder there one year. I remember one year somebody broke their ankle during a battle. So that type of stuff can certainly happen. I do know there was an incident at an event I did not attend where somebody was using a simulated mortar and blew off a couple of their fingers.
Whoa.
So that's probably the worst incident of that nature that I know of. But again, I wasn't there to witness that, thankfully. I've heard of people having. I know there was a gentleman who had a heart attack and passed away at a World War I event. But yeah, I think that's the worst I've seen at a World War II
I
event.
bet there is a lot of old timers that are doing it that, it's a lot of strenuous activity to run in the sand.
Right.
If they're
That's
doing that
certainly
one.
the case. Yeah.
No
And hey,
shade.
when I'm that age, I hope I'm still doing that. And if
Yeah,
I have
right.
a heart attack out there doing that, then that's how I want to go, doing what I love.
So be it.
For the vehicles, what kind of like safety rules do they have around those? Because there's like guys laying on the ground and then tanks rolling around and stuff like that too.
Yeah, great point. Usually at D-Day, they will either have like those tanks, they have terrible visibility.
Oh yeah.
It's so hard to see out of them. And I think of you've seen the movie Fury.
Yeah.
There's that scene in Fury where the one tank almost runs over their own guys, and War Daddy's like, "Get your head out of your ass! There's guys laying in front of you." But that's the reality of it. You're looking through a little slit a lot of the time, and you don't know what's going on. So they'll have people outside of the tanks walking around them to make sure nobody is laying in that area. And on top of that, they usually also have kind of separated areas where the tanks will be that are marked off. And so the tanks, no infantry are allowed to go in that area, and the tanks don't go outside of that area. So they can pretty much drive around freely there and not have to worry about running anybody over.
Okay.
That's a cool idea. Yeah, I think the Conneaut place said 50 feet at least, but if they have a gun on the vehicle, stay 100 feet away. Sounds
Exactly.
like a
Yeah,
good
some of
distance.
those right. And after you hear one of those guns on one of the tanks fire, you won't want to go any closer than 100 feet. I'll tell you that. They can rattle you.
Speaking of, like, how do the pyrotechnics work for like the explosions and stuff? I'm sure they have like little obvious areas with a flag that people can see or something like that. Like, hey, don't come over here. There's going to be an
Exactly.
explosion.
Yeah, that is typically the case. And at D-Day, they used to plant a lot of explosives in the beach like that. And that was, I think, before I really started doing the beach battles. So I don't recall exactly how they marked them, but I'm sure it was with a flag or something similar. And they have a person detonating them who knows where they're located so they don't set anything off in a dangerous situation. But now they actually only have pyrotechnics underground in a specified area.
Okay.
So there's like a taped off area kind of to the side. And when the planes will fly over, they'll set off some charges there to make it look like there's some bombs being dropped or something. But that way they don't have to worry about it being too close to people. And maybe that's also good because they can put some larger explosives in there without having to worry about whether or not it's going to go off next to somebody. They have a
For
better
like
plan for that.
for like grenades or mortars or like tank shots, do they like fire like Nerf projectiles or anything like that? Like how do you know you got blown up?
Yeah, sometimes they do. I would say tanks typically fire nothing. It's just a black powder charge. Stuff like mortars, sometimes they will put either a Nerf football or maybe a 3D printed projectile that's very light, or even sometimes they'll do like a Huggy drink bottle that's full of flour. So when it hits the ground, it'll make a puff of smoke like that.
That's cool.
Um,
Cool.
and that's fun, but typically they don't allow any type of projectile like that at a public battle where there's a crowd, just out of fear that something might get tossed into the crowd and hurt a spectator. So those are often reserved for the tacticals that we do. But we'll typically throw dummy grenades. A lot of people bring along rubber grenades to throw, but they don't have any type of pyrotechnic associated with it. It's just a rubber grenade, just as if it was a Nerf ball you were throwing.
And do you prefer these events that have the vehicles, the planes, the tanks, the pyrotechnics, or would you rather a small operation like a paratrooper behind the lines sneaking around?
You know, they're very different experiences. And I would say the ones where it's maybe smaller and we're on our own with nobody watching, that's where you can get more of an immersive experience. That's a little closer, obviously not even close to being the same, but closer to what a soldier would have experienced when we're walking around, going out on patrols at night by ourselves, stuff like that, that you can't do at a public event. But then when you talk about a public battle like D-Day, where you have all these tanks and planes and landing craft, I mean, that's an experience like no other. You can't get that experience anywhere else of seeing those tanks in action and the planes are flying overhead while the landing craft are coming in. So they're very different experiences, but they're both very important and both very fun.
You're like to experience the landing craft alone is like a real cool, unique thing to just. I know, yeah, like you said, it's not exactly the same, but you can see how you can be nervous as you're in there and it's shaking and it's rocking around and you're put yourself back into it and be like, oh shit, they must have been shitting their pants.
Exactly, yeah. And that's like I said, going back to that feeling of, oh my God, thank God this isn't real or I'd be screwed. It gives you an appreciation for that like nothing else can.
Or even just like riding on a tank or a half track. That sounds cool by itself.
Oh, definitely, yeah. Yeah, that's an incredible experience and you can learn a lot from doing that.
And this isn't quite a safety thing, but have you witnessed anyone stealing anything of value? Or I'm sure some people have had things walk away on them.
Or like getting looted as
Right.
a dead soldier.
Yeah, like yeah, do you ever get looted as a dead soldier? And then you go, hey, where'd that guy go? He took my gun.
Right. You definitely do get looted, but
Wow.
typically people are very respectful and will only take things that are not valuable and give back anything else. So, for example, I was at an
Wow,
event
you do get
where,
looted.
yeah, at those tacticals. So, for an example, we captured some German prisoners and took their equipment off, and then we found a reproduction World War II chocolate bar, and of course, ripped that thing open and split it up and ate it right there, and looked through their papers and other snacks. So stuff like that, maybe we will indulge in, but nothing that we think the person would actually miss.
Yeah, I never thought of that. That's something cool you could bring is things to get looted. That's funny.
Right. And we do often do that. I'll load my pockets up with little trinkets and equipment and paperwork and pictures of loved ones, things like that, so that if you get captured, they go through that. It can be a fun experience, and it adds another level of authenticity to it. But you typically wouldn't steal anything there. Even for the bad apples that would want to take something, that would be a pretty bad time to do it because I think it'd be pretty noticeable. But there have been, I remember at D-Day many years ago, my commanding officer, somebody took his helmet from his display in the night, another reenactor, and he did end up getting it back, but it was like a very intricate heist. They stole this helmet from him and then repainted it there the next day so nobody would notice that it was his and all this stuff. And I guess
Whoa.
it changed hands,
Jeez.
and eventually he tracked down somebody who knew where it was and got it back. But stuff like that can happen.
Like no BAR or anything big went missing?
No, I've never heard of any. Oh, actually, now that you mention it, there was a guy who lost a Luger in the woods at an event I went to last year. Now, it wasn't stolen. He had it in a holster on his belt, and I guess the buckle broke and the whole holster fell out with the original Luger in there. And we looked for it for a
Oh
long
my
time. I
God.
don't think he ever recovered that.
Jeez.
Shit.
Yeah, I was gonna ask how often stuff gets like lost or broken.
Yeah.
Right. That's probably the most expensive thing I've ever heard of getting lost or broken.
Oh, that guy had to be sad.
I'm sure. Yeah. That was sad. I would hope that maybe he got it back after I left or something. I mean, if that were my pistol, I would have stayed there all week walking around looking for
Yeah.
it. I wouldn't have gone home without the thing. They'd have to kick me out.
Seriously.
But yeah, people, and as far as breaking or damaging things, that happens as well. But typically, it's more disposable stuff. You'll run through your boots pretty quick, and maybe even you'll crack a rifle stock here and there or something. But nothing too valuable gets broken.
I don't know. K98 stocks aren't cheap.
That is very true. Yeah.
And do you believe the FUD lore that when the enemy heard the pings of the Garand that they knew the soldier was empty and would charge them?
No, I do not believe that. But I do believe that soldiers at the time believed that.
Oh,
I just don't think
Ooh,
it was
okay.
really happening. I think it was one of those things that was a myth during the war. Just like now, if you were to talk to a soldier, I'm sure they would tell you about rumors that they heard
yeah.
about things that were going on that maybe they found out later weren't true.
Well, especially if you
And
didn't
I
like the
think
gun, you could say, "Oh, come on, it makes a noise when the clip comes out.
exactly.
You can't top it off."
And that's kind of a natural thing to think of with a weapon. When you give somebody a weapon that makes a sound when it's out of ammunition, that's just the first conclusion that you come to is, well, I don't want anyone to know I'm out of ammunition. But in
Right.
reality, was the enemy really listening for that? I don't think so.
The last thing on the safety, I think we kind of covered it, but I know we said they check your ammo or have someone check your ammo. Is the guy also checking your gun? You said something about the adapter. They check the blank
Right.
adapter. Do they check over your gun at all? Or is it more like, here's my adapter?
Right. So typically they will look at your gun to some extent. It varies at reenactments. I've been to ones where they take a glance and go, okay, it looks fine. You know what you're doing. And I've been to ones where they bring out a screwdriver and check the tightness of my blank adapter to make sure it's not going to come off, and have me open my action and take my rifle apart to make sure everything's in spec and nothing's worn down. So it really just depends on who's doing the check. But they typically will check just the presence of your adapter and whether or not it works with the type of blanks you have. Now, as far as not having an adapter, the purpose of the adapter is only to cycle the weapon. So sometimes if you don't have an adapter on, sometimes people choose to do that and they'll just cycle the
Manually.
action manual
Right.
every time. So at that point, you have a bolt action M1 Garand. But for a bolt action rifle, you would have no adapter, and if you didn't have an adapter on a weapon that would typically use one, you would just have to cycle it manually.
That's cool.
Yeah, I think sometimes people who have never fired blanks, who I see commenting on my videos and stuff, they think the adapter is like required to load the blank. And I think that's a common misconception, is that you have to have an adapter on there to be able to fire a blank, and typically that's not the case.
Right, but I think you don't get many opportunities. I don't know about your gun ranges to mag dump an M1, so get the get the adapter so you could just fully mag dump it.
Exactly. Exactly.
So,
That's how I
speaking
feel.
Speaking of, what's like the general cost of blanks? I didn't even think about that until right now. Like, how much do they cost if you're going through hundreds of them on these events?
It can really vary, but for new production blanks, and I'll explain why I say that in a minute. For new production blanks, oftentimes it can be 80 cents to $1 per round, which, I mean, when you're running around and blasting through a bunch of them for an entire weekend, you might go through 100 or 200 rounds pretty quickly. Now, I typically try to buy bulk surplus military blanks when I can. So I'll go looking for auctions and stuff like that. Those blanks used to be super available. The government made a ton of them in 30-06. That's typically what I'm buying for my M1 Garand. So I'll buy those. And I know that some of the German reenactors, they have it good because the German army made a ton of plastic 8mm blanks.
Oh,
And
those
you can
blue
buy
ones,
those
right?
surplus blanks for next to nothing. They're a few cents. I think it's $80 for 1,000 blanks, as
Damn.
opposed to $80 for 80 blanks if you're
Wow.
buying new ones. So, and I do know some people who will adapt their M1 Garands to 308 so they can fire those plastic blanks. That's a very cheap way to run the weapon.
Right. I'm not doing that, but someone else can.
Yeah, give me
Exactly.
the full bore stuff.
Yep.
All right. I think that brings us to the second most asked about reenacting related thing, the gear.
Yeah, probably the main part of the show for
Mhm.
you.
Right.
Yep.
And most of the questions I saw were like, how accurate do I have to be? Can things be off a few years? And I'm accurate, but I'm just missing a few items. So in general, what's the deal? Like, how authentic and accurate do you have to be? I know we kind of went over some of
That,
that, but like, if
yeah.
you're off by years,
No, that is a lot of people wonder about that, and there's no set answer. Some people have differing opinions on that, and different events will kind of allow a different level of what we call FARB. I don't know if you've heard that term, but that's what we call anything that's not
huh,
period accurate. It's called FARB. Uh,
uh,
don't know exactly where that term comes from, but it's been used in reenacting for forever, as far as I know. But your level of farbiness can kind of vary based on the event you're going to. So I went to an event recently where they put out a long list of required items down to the underwear that they wanted you to wear for the event. And every single thing had to be the exact specification that was on that list. They were extremely strict, and they made you submit pictures of your equipment beforehand to make sure that it all
whoa,
checked those boxes and nothing was made after that period we were portraying. So not even just World War II. It had to be stuff that would have been present at the time of the battle we were reenacting.
but what if it's missing and
Now,
not wrong? It's just missing.
yeah, some things definitely can be optional, and certain things like maybe a certain type of bag or a raincoat or something like that, you can certainly go without that, especially when you're getting started. It's most important to have the basics that every soldier would have, and then you can kind of add on from there. So when you're a beginner, I don't think anyone expects you to have every single item. And you can kind of add to your kit over time and flush it out with all those details. starting with the most noticeable things like your boots and your uniform and helmet, and then getting into the equipment and the weapon, and then eventually, hopefully, you have all the items needed to do an accurate portrayal.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, is there some like freedom to it? Like, can you have like, oh, I wear my coat this way, or I have this mesh on my helmet, and this guy has leaves on his helmet, that kind of stuff.
Yeah, they're definite. As long as it's period accurate, there can definitely be variations because when you look at pictures of World War II soldiers, a lot of times they're all over the place. But that's usually how we make that determination is by researching original pictures. So if you're representing a unit where every single guy had the unit crest painted on their helmet, then they'll probably require you to have that painted on your helmet. But you'll see some units where most people don't have shoulder patches sewn on. Every guy has a different type of field jacket. They're wearing different boots because some guys didn't get the newest boots yet. That gives you a little more flexibility in what choices you have for the equipment that you can use.
Can you use repro stuff to fill in the blanks?
You can definitely use repro stuff, and I would say
Oh,
most
cool.
reenactors use a fair amount of reproduction stuff, and it really varies based on the item. Stuff like boots, you're almost always going to see reproductions being used because, original boots are one, very expensive, and two, easy to destroy. Like I said, you go through boots fairly quickly, and you don't want to buy a nice original pair and then ruin it. And that's typically the case. Things that'll get ruined, you try to use reproductions to avoid wearing down these originals, which are not only in high demand, but there's only so many of them left. They should be treated like collector's items. But for other things
Right.
like my bags, my cartridge belt, or my helmet, things like that, that I'm not worried about if they get a little dirt on them, but they're not going to get ruined. I'm not walking in them like my boots. I will often use originals for that. And I generally prefer using original stuff to reproductions where I can. I'm lucky that I'm a pretty thin guy. I can fit in some of the larger size original uniforms, but guys were really skinny back then. A lot of times when you see
Yep.
original uniforms, it's like size 28 waist, and it looks like I couldn't even
Yep.
fit one leg in them. And I'm a skinny guy. I can't even get into most of this stuff. So that's another reason why people would go to reproductions. But like I said, it depends on the item. For certain things, for certain things, originals are widely available and sometimes are cheaper than using a reproduction. And for other things, it makes more sense to buy a reproduction because you don't want to damage the original or you can't come across an original, things like that.
And are people that use a lot of repro stuff kind of shunned, or like if you have like a Korean War era helmet instead of a World War II era helmet, where it's a difference of like 5 years, or it's like the tiny like the placement of the rivets or whatever, do people kind of
Look at this asshole.
get on you for that?
I would say to the second part, definitely. If it's noticeably different than the original gear that the guys would have used, people will notice that. We're all big nerds about that stuff. That's why we were there. And somebody might even call you out on that or ask you to change it out, something like that. Usually those tiny details, like the helmet rivets, you can get away with. But for bigger stuff, people definitely notice. And for those small things, even if they're not going to call you out, it's still kind of frowned upon. Like in the requirements, they might even mention that your helmet has to have the seam at the front because that's where the seam
Right.
would have been located on World War II helmets. They put it at the rear later, and sometimes they don't want you to use that. But as far as guys using reproduction stuff, as long as it's a quality reproduction and is a faithful representation of whatever it's trying to reproduce, I would say there's no looking down on the people who choose to use reproductions as long as they're accurate.
So it sounds like the whole attitude of everyone is be as accurate as possible.
Yes.
That seems to
And I
be it.
think Yeah, and I think most I don't wanna make it sound like everyone's getting on each other's case about it. That's what we're trying to do at these reenactments is to be as authentic as possible. So usually people are policing their own kits and they're saying, I want to get this helmet because that's the accurate one and I want to be a good representation of this. That's why I'm joining the reenactment. And there is definitely some leeway when you get started. I think everyone, when you first join, like you said, you may be missing a couple things and have to borrow stuff. You may have an item or two that is a crappy reproduction that you got on Amazon or that isn't quite up to the snuff of what reenactors would expect. But, we're understanding of that. Everyone starts somewhere. So I don't want to make it sound like you have to show up to your first event looking like you just walked out of 1944 and there's not a thing on you that anyone could identify as not being period correct. But we do try to
Hey,
strive
you
for that
should.
level of accuracy.
All right, new guy, report to the underwear checker.
When you're all geared up, how heavy do you think you are? 'Cause I know you bring a lot of things. You're pretty accurate. What was the
Right.
typical World War II soldier dragging around?
You know, I can't really give you an estimate in terms of pounds. It's really hard for me to estimate, but I would say oftentimes I have two loaded up. If I'm doing a rifleman impression, I would typically have more gear than a medical one. So I'll tell you about that. For that, I would typically have my pack loaded up with everything that would be in a pack. So heavy stuff like ration cans and my mess tin. I'll have a full canteen or maybe two on me, and that stuff's all heavy. And then oftentimes one of the heaviest parts is your rifle and your ammunition. So for
Right.
something like this, I might bring 200 rounds of ammunition or more that I'm wearing on my person and maybe some more in reserve depending on the event. And then I also maybe have reproduction grenades and stuff like that, which are very heavy. And then your
Oh,
rifle is oftentimes the heaviest thing. If it's not the heaviest, it at least seems like it because you notice it the most because you're carrying it around all day. But those M1 Garands, let me tell you, you'll get a bicep workout carrying that thing around.
Oh yeah.
yeah. I've never heard anyone say it's light after dragging it around all day.
Right. I think everyone hears about how heavy it is and stuff, and you notice that when you pick it up. But when you carry it around for that long, you you really start to get an appreciation for how heavy it really is. And on the flip side, I think if you carry an M1 carbine, you get the same thing on the opposite side. You realize how light and how nice that would have been to have.
Yeah, I
You
mean,
throw that thing over your shoulder and you can almost forget it's there.
For the events, do they also have like reenactors or living history guys that are there for like a completely different like battle or time period? Do they kind of do like combined displays or anything like that? Like, is there a Russian display at the D-Day event, or the Civil War guys show up and kind of just show off?
Right. That's a good question.
show off.
That does happen. They they there are sometimes timeline events where they'll try to have some reenactors from every time period so they can
That's
give you
cool.
kind of a taste of everything through history, and those are cool to see how the gear evolved and everything.
Yeah,
At
that sounds
other
cool.
events, yeah, it is a very cool experience. And then there might be other events where it's focused on World War II, but they'll allow uh, any portrayal or any impression for the displays. So you might have, guys who never would have met. You'll have a Marine from the Pacific and a U.S. infantry guy who looks like he's about to land in Normandy right next to each other. You definitely see that sometimes. But for events like D-Day, you'd still get some of that variety, but it's all focused around that event. So you might get like a US paratrooper next to a British soldier and a US Navy sailor all of those are accurate impressions to have for D-Day, but would they have all been hanging out in camp together? Probably not. But it just depends on the event. The scenario and the event itself kind of dictate the type of variety that you see among the reenactors.
Okay. What's the most out of place or weirdest impression that you've seen at one of these? Was there like any Roman centurions there at D-Day?
No, but I remember I did see somebody show up dressed as Captain America. I don't know if I'd count that.
Yeah, I
But
saw the
yeah,
movie. He was there. Yeah.
You know,
right, right.
imagine though, like a red coat British soldier with a musket running around. That would be pretty
Yeah,
cool.
that would
Just
be.
participating.
I know there's a picture from a reenactment of some Roman soldiers manning an MG42 position.
Oh, I've seen that.
And I don't know what event that happened at, but I see that photo all the time. So you definitely do get some strange crossovers at those events.
We talked about the gear accuracy, but with the firearms, would like a post-war international harvester Garand break the rules, or like a K98K post-war Czech one?
So that's typically, as long as it looks the part, it's good to go. So an
All right.
International Harvester M1 would be fine with the caveat that you would have to change out the hardware to look like it was a World War II production one. So
Interesting.
Wow.
you would want to put lock bar sights on it and everything like that. That's one of those small details that when you're first getting started, people look the other way. Not everyone has the lock bar sights and the
Right.
single slot gas cylinder screw, all that stuff. But typically, the production year doesn't matter. Nobody's going to go over and look at your serial number and look up when your rifle was made. It's more, does it have the correct features you would see if you were looking at a soldier in World War II with his
Wow.
rifle?
So the guns you can get away with it, but the gear, that's where they get you.
Well,
Right,
see,
and
if
it
it
is.
doesn't look obvious, but like the Czech post-war K98s have the winter trigger guard, that's very obvious.
Yeah,
So I
that
could
would
see that getting
typically
turned
not
away.
fly.
Yeah,
Right.
that's pretty
And
For
cool.
same thing with reproduction weapons. There are modern manufacturer M1 carbines, for example.
Yeah,
And as long as it has the features and the look of a carbine that would have been around, that's totally acceptable, just like reproduction gear.
cool.
For sidearms, you mentioned that you had like a pocket pistol. Is there more freedom with those? Can you have just like any old like a 32 or something that you could have brought from stateside?
Right. There definitely were some guys bringing little pocket pistols from home, and sometimes I will carry a little 38 in my pocket, and there's a lot of guys in my group who do that, but that wasn't a super common thing during the war, so we try to limit that sometimes for displays and things like that. I'd say it's more fun for tacticals, where you might have more of a use for a sidearm. And for just after hours, it's fun to look at everyone's sidearms and everyone's comparing their little pocket pistols and stuff like that. So, and since it's in your pocket, not everyone's seeing it as part of your impression. So oftentimes we'll bring those along just for ourselves to kind of, I don't want to say play around with, but kind of.
I was curious if you could hacksaw ridge that shit and run around with no gun and just save people as a medic.
Well, yeah, the medics definitely, they weren't armed during World War II, typically. If we're talking about the European theater, which is typically what I'm reenacting,
All right.
US medics didn't have any type of weapons at all. So when I do a medic impression, I typically have nothing. Now, Hacksaw Ridge, of course, they're portraying the Pacific, and it was actually more common for medics there to be armed because the Japanese didn't have really any interest in obeying the Geneva Convention, so there wasn't a reason to not be armed. The Germans, at least, often abided by that since they had their own medics and expected us to treat their medics the same way. But yeah, it was a different story in the Pacific.
So, did you say you had any bolt actions? I don't think you did, right?
No, I don't have any in my collection. I'd love to get my hands on a Springfield soon, an '03 or an '03A3.
Yeah, I was gonna ask which
Uh,
of would you get? Would you, you could technically both are correct. So, would you get a
right.
03A3 or the '03?
I think I'll get both at some point. So I guess whichever one I find for a
Correct.
good price first is what I'll buy.
All right,
Nice.
good.
There you go.
That's the correct answer.
Yeah,
You
so
know,
if you have one you're looking to sell,
uh, no, see, I'm the type of collector. I get like one of everything if I can. So, I don't have extras. I need to fill all the
right.
gaps.
Yep. Yeah,
Yep.
I do the same. I'm a World War One guy, so I get one each from the countries.
Right.
Hmm.
And then you can't go wrong with the '03 or the '03A3, So get them both.
Right.
Speaking of cool guns, like what's some of the coolest stuff you've seen there? I know there's often it seems to be there's quite a few full autos in the community, which are big money. I don't know if those were just
Right.
beef-hongs that I didn't know back in the day, or seems to be some money floating around.
Yeah, you definitely see a lot of cool full autos. I'm trying to think. I think some of the coolest that I see are at D-Day. The tanks that they have there have 50 cals mounted on them that they'll
Ooh.
run blanks through. And not just some, they run those things like you wouldn't believe. It seems like the guys only stop pushing the button on those things if they get a jam, and then they clear it and they're pulling the trigger again. I can't even fathom how many rounds they go through in those things. But I guess if you have the money to own multiple tanks, you're not too worried about spending the money on those 50 cal rounds.
Yep.
Right.
So those are really cool. I always love seeing the MG42s. I would say those ones are usually some kind of custom made B-Fong that can't fire live ammo. Although I have seen real um, live fire MG42s at events.
Awesome. Do you get to play with them
BARs.
or you just get to look at them?
I've just gotten to look at them and to get shot at by them, which is always cool. Not with live rounds, with blanks, of course. I know I was just saying some of them are live fire, but shot at, not actually shot at. But I do get to see them in action, but I've never been the one pulling the trigger. You see a lot of the US, the 30 cals. I have gotten to shoot some of those, the 1919 A4s. And those will be a mix. I'd say typically when you see those, they're live fire. If they're not a gas gun, there's not a lot of B-Fongs of those being made. So typically if you see one of those, it's a real 1919. And those
Do
are
they
really
allow
cool.
do they allow semi-auto ones, or gotta be full
They
auto?
do, and I see those a good bit as well. Those aren't quite as fun, but they're a lot more attainable for the average collector or reenactor.
I
And
held
same
a
thing with.
transferable. Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, that's fine. You held a transferable what?
STG 44 at one of the
Oh,
reenactments I went to. That was pretty sick.
that is so cool. I've seen some guys running around with those, but I've never gotten an up close look or gotten to talk to anyone about, what the story is behind those.
Yeah, the
Because
dude who
that's
had
an
it was like 80. So
yeah, I
he
believe
prob-
that.
he probably had money for it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I do see MP40s and stuff. I see a lot of BARs, but it's definitely a treat when you see a full auto BAR. Most people have the semi-autos that are made by Ohio Ordnance, but when you see those original or full auto BARs, they're a treat. They're a lot of fun.
And you said you had grenades in your bag. What? And you said they were heavy.
Right.
So how do those work?
So typically the ones I carry are just for looks. They're heavy, so I wouldn't throw them. And they look exactly like a real World War II Mark II hand grenade or smoke grenade or whatever, but they won't do
All right.
anything. Now, people also carry rubber grenades that they'll throw and won't do anything, but they at least kind of look the part, but you can throw them. or people sometimes get some kind of pyro grenades, either like a
Cool.
grenade you would use at a paintball match or some kind of bang. And those usually don't look the part at all, but do have the pyrotechnic aspect. So we cover the full spectrum of
Yeah.
grenades there.
Now, you need a company to make one that looks the part and does the pyro, and then you're done.
Exactly. Yeah, I know somebody
Fun.
was trying to make some themselves, like 3D printing ones. They could be they were really light plastic, but they at least looked like the real grenades, and that you could put a little charge in them that wasn't dangerous. So I think that is a really cool idea. I wish somebody would produce those
Yeah.
on a larger scale.
Yeah, but
so
I
we
don't
can
know.
use them.
In this day and age, having schematics for explosives is a good thing. I don't know. You got to be careful.
Yeah, you make a good point, and I get I get nervous even having those shipped to me when I buy like reproductions, you
Right.
know? I gotta imagine if they scan that thing at the post office, they're gonna be having a field day with that. And usually when I buy the grenades, they ship with warning papers inside that say this is an inert replica, it's not real, all this kind of stuff in case they check the package somewhere.
In case it breaks open on the.
Yeah.
Right.
This is fake. This is fake.
Speaking of expensive stuff, we can now move on to vehicles. So, like, how common are they at reenactments? I know you see a lot of like jeeps and stuff like that, or tanks and the bigger things only at like larger events, or do they pretty often show up? Because I feel like the guys that would own these would like want to show them off and bring them all the time.
Right. Yeah, the tanks definitely are usually only at the larger events. And mostly just because there aren't as many people who own them and are bringing them around. So like a lot of the ones that are at D-Day Conneaut in Ohio, that's from a group in Florida that brings up a convoy of all these tanks. So they don't come out for just any small event that we have going on, of course. They come
Right.
up once a year for that big event, and that's about it. Now, stuff like trucks and Jeeps, you see those at pretty much any event. Lots of reenactors have their own Jeep or their own truck that they work on, so they love to bring those out and put them to use.
Deuce and
And
a
I'd say
half.
things like, yeah, definitely deuce and a halves. You'll see those, or weapons carriers, the Dodge, like a WC-51. You'll see those often. And I'd say a half track is somewhere in between. You'll see them more often than a tank, but less often than a truck, because those are a little more rare and a little more expensive and difficult to transport.
Sounds like fun. Especially the
Oh,
one that
absolutely.
when they have airplanes.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah,
crazy.
that's the only event I've ever been to that has the planes is D-Day, and that really adds another level to the event. It's such an experience to have those planes, and they fly really low overhead, and it just adds so much to the experience.
Yeah, that'd be really cool to see. And do you
Yeah.
prefer doing, well, we'll say tactical events? Do you prefer vehicles or more like squad-based tactical events?
It's nice to have some vehicles there, especially just for logistics. So for some of them, if we're at these tacticals, like I said, typically we mostly have Jeeps and things of that sort, but we'll be set up in the field, and it's not like we're driving this Jeep into battle, but the Jeeps will bring food up to our lines while we're in the foxholes, or they will pick up guys and take them to a new position and move us
Cool.
around. So in that sense, the vehicles are very helpful.
Yeah, that's nice.
And it also does add another dimension to the combat when they have, like one tactical that I go to, the Germans often have half tracks or a tank destroyer, and we've never had any armor at those that I've been to, but even just fighting against those armored vehicles in simulated combat, it adds another level to the battle.
Yeah, that sounds fun.
Yeah, I bet. I love me a Stug.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this one they had a martyr, and it was
Ooh.
really cool to see that thing driving around. And when you're out in a field and you think you have a great defensive position, and then a big half track rolls up or a tank or something like that, kind of, it makes you puts you in a tough position that, again, would not want to be experiencing that in real combat. That's for sure.
And are you supposed to stay in character? Like, when that pulls up on you, are you supposed to, you know, surrender and just stay in your character, or are you saying, "Oh shit, cool, look at this"?
Yeah, I would say typically during the battle portion, we stay in character to that extent where we're not going to go take a picture with it while it's advancing on us. But we're also not so in character that we have to, like, every word we say has to be period accurate.
Well, is the
Um,
majority of your conversation role playing the part, or is it
yeah, I would say
real life stuff and then you throw in stuff when things happen?
it's definitely a mix of both. During the battles, we're often just talking about what's going on around us and, what position we're going to move to and how many guys are advancing. So in that sense, we're in character. We're trying to put ourselves in the moment and focus on what's going on. So I guess it's period accurate in that sense. But once the action dies down, yeah, we might be talking about period correct stuff, but also we'll talk about whatever we normally would. We're not restricting the conversation to just period accurate stuff.
I
We
bet
don't
some
take it
people
to
do
that
though.
degree.
Some people probably
Right.
do.
Right. Some
So
people do, and there's a time for that, when it's that can also kind of be an immersive experience when it's late at night and you're sitting uh by the fire in your foxhole or something and you're talking about something that guys would have talked about at the time or singing songs like guys would have at the time to pass the time while they were out there. That can really be cool, but I'm not the type of guy who's gonna only talk about period accurate stuff or only put on a character and have
Daniel
that be my whole
Day-Lewis of
persona.
reenacting.
Right. I haven't taken it to that level yet.
You said nighttime. You're still reenacting at night?
Right. So typically
Wow.
for those public battles, the nighttime is just spent hanging out in camp, but that still means that we're sitting out in period accurate
Right,
tents
right.
in uniform. And then sometimes at these other events, we're actually the tacticals were actually set up in foxholes. Sometimes we might even have guys pulling security or going on patrols throughout the night. So
Cool.
sometimes the events never really end. It's fighting all night. Anytime is fair game. But of course, the night attacks always sound like a good idea, and then when it's freezing cold and it's 4 in the morning, nobody actually is gonna get out of their bed to go on a night attack. In my experience, that's typically the case. So
it,
usually the shooting wraps up at some point. But there have been
so
events where we're going on patrols and shooting at midnight, 1 a.m.
Wow.
And that can be a really neat experience. It's not every day you get to run around in the dark and pop rounds off like that.
Right.
yeah, is this usually like on private land or like out in the country? I would assume. Otherwise, you get like noise ordinance violations and getting the cops called and shit like that.
Yeah, that's exactly right. You don't want to be doing that in a neighborhood or something. I went to
Yeah,
an
right.
event recently that was on a very cool site. It was an abandoned sanatorium.
Uh-oh.
So this was, I think they housed tuberculosis patients there starting in like the 30s or 40s. And they converted it to a prison. And then it was abandoned and shut down. And this group bought it to use for reenactments. And they
Wow.
held their first event. And it was such an amazing. I mean, we're set up in these huge buildings that have that vintage
And
architecture look
and
to
how
them.
abandoned are they? Are they like, it's like Stalingrad abandoned looking? Like,
They're
what's it?
not like they're structurally sound, but like inside the buildings, you can tell nobody's been there in a long time. The paint's peeling off the walls. They're in complete disrepair. No
Cool.
electricity or plumbing, anything like that. So that one was really neat,
That's
and the
scary.
night fighting made me think of that because that was one where at night we were posted up at all the windows of our building and we were leaving to go on patrols and trying to capture enemy prisoners out of their area during the nighttime. So that
Wow.
was a really cool sight to be able to use. I hope I get to go back there at some point.
That's awesome. And you're sleeping out there?
Yeah, we did sleep out there. That was a very cold one. That happened in March, and man, we were freezing. It
Wow.
always sounds like so much fun, like, oh yeah, I'm gonna take only period accurate stuff and sleep with only what a soldier would have had. But then when you're laying on a freezing concrete floor with only 2 wool blankets,
Right.
you start
Can
to
I get
rethink
9
your
more blankets,
choices.
please?
Right. That's exactly right. Yeah.
And the folks that own these properties, are they usually in the community, or is it just like, oh yeah, my uncle's got some land and he doesn't really give a shit what you do. Come hang out here.
I would say more often than not, it's people in the community or at least connected to some extent.
That's cool.
And those people typically will open their land up for this type of thing.
Do they make them president? They could be acting president.
Right. You gotta imagine they're
FDR.
getting some perks if it's on their land. They
Yeah.
get to be the 5-star general or whatever. But
Right.
sometimes for these tacticals, we'll even do them like that one I was talking about, where oftentimes there are half tracks and stuff like that showing up and we fight all night. That one actually happens on a military base.
Oh, okay.
Wow.
So it's an active military base, and they let us use sections of the base where they normally do training. So they have little fake towns set up, and they have
Whoa.
buildings and things like that that we can fight through. And it's really cool that we have access to that stuff. So
Yeah, that is really cool.
Yeah.
yeah,
Is anyone LARPing as any historical figures? I know that the Conneaut place that says you cannot be Patton or Rommel or De Gaulle and these people, but have you ever seen anyone
right.
show up? I know there's got to be a guy just daring to be Hitler one day.
Exactly. No, I have never seen anything like that. I have heard of people dressing up as Hitler specifically, but not at any event that I've been to. And
Well, what about
usually if
Patton
someone,
or MacArthur?
I would say it's generally frowned upon to represent a specific individual unless it's like somebody who's related to you. So sometimes people will say, I'm going to portray my grandfather because he was in this division, and that's how a lot of people get into reenacting or why they chose that group. So they might, wear dog tags with that person's name on it or something like that to pay homage to them. But it's usually frowned upon to outside of that situation to represent a specific person. I know that's more common in like Civil War reenacting. You'll see a lot of people portray the specific
Yeah.
generals. But for whatever reason, that's not as common in World War II reenacting. I guess I have seen some pictures online of people representing like General MacArthur at an event. But you really don't see that stuff very often.
All right, I'll take my Rommel costume out of the cart. All right, so we didn't really talk about the how to move, shoot, and die, although we did talk about dying. But just to clear up some things, as far as where you're going, how much do you know in the beginning about where your end game is going to be? And like you said, there's a rank and file that you have to follow. And do they use actual army techniques, signals, and commands, and all that to share what you have to do?
Yes, they definitely use army techniques to share information and to communicate. So, in the case of World War II, that often means old handheld radios and a lot of hand signals and runners running around to share info. And like you said, we have that rank structure. So, typically at these tactical events, maybe at the start of the event, we don't know what the plan is for the weekend, where we're going to be going outside of the scenario they set up. So maybe they know, okay, it's supposed to be Normandy during the summer of 44, so we're on the advance, but that's all we know. And then from there, people at a higher level will come up with a plan. Okay, we'll assault this German position at this time tomorrow, and we'll have one element take this route and one take that route. And then our officers and NCOs will give us the information on what we will specifically be doing. So the information does kind of trickle down like that typically.
Do you have to know the real army? Like, should you study the army signal? Like, I know there's an arms signals from the vehicles that Conneaut has a brochure for, and so is it something that someone should learn beforehand, or you'll be able to figure it out once you're there? Don't want to show up
Typically,
and
you'll
not
be
know.
able to figure it out, and if there's anything you need to know, they'll usually run through it. Sometimes they do ask you to kind of read up on a certain thing in advance, like, hey, I want everyone in my squad to be familiar with these few signals or this type of column so we can use it at the event. Sometimes they'll tell you that in advance so everyone's on the same page and it's not any kind of confusion when they ask you to get in a
Right.
tactical column. You should know what that is so you can do it when it comes up. But you don't need a lot of prior knowledge on that type of thing to adapt to it while you're there.
And are generally you like following the orders and everything, or you can't be like, oh, I saw a guy over there. I'm gonna go get him real quick.
I would say generally you are following orders, but you do also have some level of autonomy. If you're out on a patrol and you come across a guy, usually it's up to your judgment and the I guess the goal of that patrol. So sometimes they will send us out and say, hey, we're looking to observe the enemy. And if you do make contact, get out of there. We don't want to try to knock them out. We're just observing. Or there might be other times where we're going on a search and destroy mission and we're looking to shoot anyone we come in contact with. So with that information in your mind, you can make your decision from there. But typically you try to follow the guidelines that you've been given.
And as far as shooting, are you allowed to shoot when and where you want, even though you're following orders? You have to wait for an order to shoot, or is there too much, too little?
Right. I would say typically at things like the tacticals, there's no rules about when and where you can shoot as long as you're doing it safely. So at certain ones where you can't shoot
That's
at
cool.
night, maybe they might have a rule about that, or they might have a rule that you can't shoot in a building or you can't shoot too close to someone. That's always the case. But outside of that, if you see an enemy, you can pretty much shoot at them. It's fair game, just like you would do on the battlefield in World War II.
Cool.
And what kind of distances are you talking here? Because if somebody shoots at you from like 400 yards, you might not even notice or know where it came from or whatever.
Exactly, and you can use your judgment on whether or not it's even worth it to return fire at that point, or whether you just want to duck your head into the foxhole and carry on with your life. But
What's like
typically, I would say you're not engaging people at that far of a distance with blanks because, people aren't going to call their hits. It's hard to tell if someone's shooting towards you. So typically the engagement distances are a little bit closer than that.
Oh, I saw one of your videos where you talked about the chicken wing shooting. Is that something you do?
Right. I often do that. And I think that's just a comfortable way to hold a rifle with a stock like that. And that is how most of the soldiers were taught during World War II. If you look at the training manuals or the videos that they used to train the soldiers, they taught them to stick their elbow up like that. And maybe that's not the tactical thing to do these days. People want to I often
Yeah.
get comments about, when I do that with a World War II rifle, people are saying that I don't know what I'm doing or that I shouldn't do that for some reason that they'll make up. But, we try to do things in a historically accurate manner. So, yeah, shooting with your elbow high is definitely historically accurate, as is how you carry your weapon. So, like, the low ready position you see a lot today, where somebody has their rifle stock tucked into their shoulder and the barrel is pointing down so they can just raise it up and shoot. That really wasn't common, at least in the US military during World War II. So we typically try not to do that, and to, at least like within my group, discourage other people from doing that and carry our weapons in a historically accurate manner, which is often just holding it down by your waist or holding it at what we would call the port position, where your rifle is kind of at an angle with the barrel pointed up. You don't see that done as often in the modern military, but that was common back then, and that's partially due to the training and also due to the actual design of the rifle that they were using back then compared to now.
That's interesting that you guys, that's full on reenacting when you're taking on the procedures, and not only do you look the part, you act the part, and it's probably something that a
Right.
lot of people watching don't even pick up on. But yeah, I could see online people commenting anytime someone holds a gun like that. There's always a bunch of people that have to say something.
Yeah. Anything that I show that has changed since World War II, like anything that they do differently in the modern military, I'm bound to get comments about it. But that's just the way it goes. It's like when I talk about how the M1 Garand uses a clip, and people will try to correct me and say that it's a magazine.
Right.
That's always a fun one, you know.
Yep. And on shooting, how often do like the blanks jam or misfire?
That really depends on the weapon and the type of blanks. Some are far more finicky than others, and in general, I would say blanks are more finicky than live ammo. Because with blanks, you're using all these adapters and stuff to try to build up pressure. With live ammo, the guns were designed to fire live ammo. The pressure is built up behind the bullet when it's fired, and there you go. That's it. It's easy enough. With blanks, we're trying to simulate that situation in the gun's barrel, and that can lead to a lot of weird misfires and problems that you might not have with live ammo. So my Garand that I typically use runs very well with the blanks that I run through it. I might get a few hang-ups here and there. And blanks are also very dirty. They fire a ton of powder and carbon into your barrel and your action, much more so than live ammo does. Because since you don't have that pressure that's built up by the projectile, you don't always get full combustion of the powder, so you get a lot of gunk jamming up your gun. Blanks are just really dirty, so that can definitely lead to malfunctions as well. But I know, like, I think I mentioned earlier, those plastic blanks that a lot of the German reenactors will use, since they're made in 8mm or sometimes 308. Those ones can be very finicky, I've heard. They have more misfires, and they have less consistent loads in them, so they can be difficult to run.
Okay.
It's got to be a pain in the ass, though, if you're in the middle and then you jam and you have to sit there and worry about fixing the jam.
Definitely, but that does happen in real combat, so.
Well, how do you call timeout, like, in a way, or how do you take a break? Can you just walk off? Do you have to ask?
Typically, if you want to take a break, you would just die. You would say, "Now's my time," you know. But usually, if your group's moving forward and you need a minute, you can communicate that to your squad leader or something, and they'll totally understand. Or you can walk back behind the line somewhere where there's not a lot of action. But that stuff definitely does happen, and it is annoying when you get a bad weapons malfunction during an event, and it can be tough to handle in the field sometimes.
Yeah. And do you guys all pee in the woods, or do you have to go to a modern porta potty?
You typically pee in the woods. Sometimes there's some kind of latrine or porta john around, but typically we're doing our business out in the woods.
So we covered a lot about the battle, about the communication, and how much you guys get. And we were thinking about what events are covered the most besides D-Day. Are there any other specific events that get covered? Like, Other famous
I would
events?
say so. D-Day is definitely a big one, and the Normandy campaign in general gets a lot of events dedicated towards it. So not just D-Day, but the time following that. But then in the winter, we typically get a lot of Battle of the Bulge events. So once the snow starts falling, and it's getting colder outside, there's more Battle of the Bulge events where people want to go out in the snow and replicate that experience.
Are there
Ooh.
any events that you wish they covered that haven't really been?
Oh, that's a great question. Um,
Like a
well,
Africa
I'm sure I
campaign or
could
something
think
like
some
that?
up. Yeah, I wish we could do more of that around here, but I live in the Midwest,
Yeah.
and we don't exactly have a lot of desert around here. But I have seen some really cool events out in the West Coast, where they have maybe some more terrain that's better equipped to represent North Africa. But yeah, I would love to take part in an event like that at some point. And same thing with Pacific events in general. Same thing, we don't have great terrain around here to represent that. But in the past few years, it seems like Pacific World War II reenacting has been becoming a lot more popular. So I have never been to an event like that, but I hope to go to one at some point soon.
Yeah, that would be fun. You could do another beach landing and all that.
Right. I think there is actually an event that has been going on for a few years as just a like a living history event where they don't really have a battle component. But I think this year they're actually adding a beach invasion, and it's some Pacific theater beach invasion. I don't know what battle they're representing specifically. I can't remember, but that's the first amphibious Pacific reenactment that I've heard of. So I'm excited to see how that goes. I won't be at that event, but I'll keep tabs on it for sure.
Maybe we'll have a rubber bonsai charge.
Right. I
Yeah.
have seen that at reenactments. It's typically hard to find imperial Japanese reenactors. We talked earlier about, sometimes maybe only a few Germans show up, and then I said that balance is usually pretty even. But for Pacific reenacting, like I said, that's growing, and the U.S. component of that seems to be growing a lot, but the Japanese reenactors are still few and far between.
Right.
Yeah. Probably not as many people really want to do that.
Right. Well,
Right. And there are some groups starting to pop up as people get more interested in the history and find other people who are interested in that same thing. But that's still a growing community.
And the German reenactors, do they try and like speak German during the events?
Oftentimes they do, at least during the battles and stuff. But they typically have varying levels of understanding. I speak a little bit of German. So sometimes I'll try to talk to them in German, and some of them get it, some of them don't, But that's definitely not a requirement. You don't have to be fluent in German to reenact German
yeah,
soldier at
you
one
wouldn't
of
have
these
that
events.
many. You wouldn't have that many people then. You had to.
Right. I posted a video not that long ago where it was of that one reenactment I mentioned was on a military base, and we actually captured some German soldiers, and the guy says something like he doesn't speak any English, and I say in German like, that's okay, I speak some German, and he just looked at me. He didn't actually speak German, so I made for a really funny moment.
Funny. And then, so how do you know the battle is over? Is there like a climactic ending that it's obvious, or it just fizzles away at the end?
So sometimes it could be either one of those things. If it's one of those big public battles, usually there is more of a climactic ending. Like at the D-Day
Oh,
reenactment, at the end, we know the Americans are gonna win, or the Allies are gonna win.
you have to say spoiler.
So right? Who knows? Maybe next year the Germans will win. We
You
don't
never
know
know.
yet.
You do it three
But
times.
yeah, on the American section of the beach, there's a big like cliff. So at the end of the battle, all the GIs charge up that bluff and
Cool.
take out the Germans or capture them or whatever. So that is
Do they
definitely
raise a
clear.
flag? That'd be cool. Raising a
Like you
flag.
mean like raise an American flag?
Right. Like
No,
an
I
Iwo
haven't
Jima
seen them
style.
do that. I've seen some people recreate that flag raising, but I've never seen them put up an American flag. I thought for a minute you meant do the Germans raise a white flag to surrender.
Oh,
And I have seen that
That'd be
as
good.
well.
I did see a lot of videos where people were surrendering. It's pretty funny. Like you think you want to die
Yeah.
and go out, but it's like, you got me.
Yep. Yep. Yeah, and then at other battles, if it's one of those tacticals or something like that, it can just kind of fizzle out. When enough of your men are down, one side might retreat, or everyone dies, and we just kind of stop and regroup for a bit. Those, like I've said, are less scripted and less planned out. So it kind of just depends how the maneuver goes and what's going on. It can definitely create a little lull in the action sometimes.
And for those, like, how do you know who won? Are there like set objectives, or just do they like count casualties and stuff like that?
Right. Sometimes there are set objectives, and other times there really are no objectives of the overall event, and they're not keeping score or tallying anything. There's no winner or loser. We're just there to, recreate what happened. But other times to give us um, kind of tasks to do. I would say at the very least, if we're going out on a specific maneuver, like going out on a patrol or going out on an attack, they'll have some kind of objective for that specific maneuver. So it might be go snag a prisoner from this group, or go see if you can observe the enemy and see if they're dug in on the other side of this hill where we think they are, something along those lines. And I've even seen other ones where they might have like a high value German target. So as we're going through the
Cool.
entire battle weekend, they'll have pictures printed out of a specific enemy soldier, and they'll say, if you find this guy, bring him to command. He's a high value target, and we want to capture him alive.
Uh,
So they do
wow, that's
fun
cool.
stuff like that that adds to the experience for sure.
That is fun. And so now you're in the woods for 2 days. You're sweating. You're carrying all your stuff all around. You're peeing in the woods. So at the end of the event, it ends. Is there any kind of like recap of the event, like a dinner or an event that they give out awards or medals or anything?
Yeah, sometimes there is something along those lines. Oftentimes, if we're at those tactical events, they'll wrap up on Saturday, and then Saturday night, everyone will hang out at like a bonfire or something like that and just kind of pal around. So the event's wrapped up, but it's a good chance to hang out with some of the German reenactors who you haven't gotten to see all weekend, or
And not in costume, not in uniform. They got a cosplay now.
um, I would say oftentimes, most often people are in uniform for things like that, just because, we're at a reenactment. How often
Right.
do you get a chance? We buy all these uniforms, you might as well wear them. Um,
Right.
but other times people might change and just hang around. But I would say usually people keep on uniforms, and sometimes people will even bring out like funny historical stuff that maybe doesn't fit the actual uh, scenario we've been portraying. So sometimes somebody might change into a Russian uniform so they can hang
Ah,
out in that, because we're all nerds and we all think that stuff is cool. So people will bring out their cool toys and bring out guns that again aren't period correct so that we can all look at them, and things like that. That's our time to kind of just hang out as history nerds and get excited over that type of thing.
right. That's
And
cool.
other events, oftentimes the public events like D-Day, after that wraps up, there is a dance, and it's a period correct, I mean, to a certain extent, period correct, USO dance. So they have like a 1940s big band playing. Everyone puts on their
Oh,
dress uniforms and cleans up and goes to this dance, and we all hang out, have a couple beers. Sometimes we'll all drive over there in Jeeps and stuff like that. So that's a nice way to wrap up some of those events. A few more events are starting to add kind of a wrap up event like that for the reenactors.
Cool. Yeah, that's something fun. And then you stay in character and keep it going. That's awesome. And is that like the dance and all that? That's open to the public or just to all you guys?
That depends. Sometimes it'll be, I think the Conneaut, the D-Day one, I think that's only open to reenactors. But I've been to
Yeah.
other ones where it's a little less organized. It's like we all just kind of go to the same, maybe like I'll use that one event, Lauer Farms, for an example. That one, there's no band playing. It's a smaller event. We'll all just go to a bar in town that is like a vintage building. It was built during the 30s or 40s. So it's a good venue for that. And in that case, there are people there other than the reenactors. But that's less of an organized event.
At some of these things, I see there's often like a swap meet or like vendors. Do you see that a lot?
Yeah, I do. I see both of those. So sometimes they'll have vendors there selling things to the public and to us reenactors. And then sometimes, like after hours when the public's not there, they'll have a swap meet for reenactors to sell things to each other. And
Cool. I like that.
I love when they do that because that's the time to get the good deals.
Right.
The reenactors will give each other a better price on stuff when they know it's going to go to good use. So usually you can pick up some good stuff if you keep your eye out at those.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
And where does one, like, if we wanted to join one of these or just go spectate, where do you find info on these? They're like a central website for them.
There are a couple places that have tried to compile lists, but really I would say the most important thing is finding a reenactment group in your area that represents something that you want to portray. And you can oftentimes track those down on Facebook. There are some World War II reenacting Facebook groups where you can search through the different reenactment groups or make a post in there saying you're looking to join a group in a specific area, and people will point you to the right place. And then from there, once you have a group, they'll be able to get you all set up for these events. So they'll tell you, what events they go to in that area and when. And some of them might be events that aren't even advertised publicly, because a lot of those private events, that's really the only way to find out about them is through an existing group. And also they'll be able to tell you where to buy all the equipment you need for that event, what you need and what you can maybe get away with not having to start out. And oftentimes they'll even loan you a weapon when you're getting started, things like that. So having a group to start out, I'd say that's the biggest stepping stone. And once you find a group you like, going from there is easier. They can help you out a lot.
Yeah, that sounds like the right first step, getting a good group for a lot.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a huge important step for that's what I always recommend to people who want to get into it, because a lot of people go and try to buy the stuff first and then realize that they bought all the wrong stuff for what they thought they wanted to portray. So definitely get some input on that from other reenactors. They'll help you out.
Right. It's not cheap to keep buying the wrong shit.
Right. Yeah, that stuff does not come cheap, that's for sure.
All right, we have a couple more things here on reenacting, and then we'll let you go. But we are the Milsurp HQ show, so we have to put you through one of the Milsurp speed rounds. It's just opinion questions, so there's no wrong answers. But it's just a fun way to see what things in our universe that you would prefer. Okay?
Mm-hmm. Okay, that sounds fun.
So I didn't have a good segue for that, so we just deviated away, and we'll go right into this. So
Let's
Kelly
do
and I
it.
are going to bombard you with a couple of questions that we ask most of our guests. Like the first one here, a cock on open. I don't know how much you have with different bolt actions, but a cock on open or a cock on close is a big debate in the community.
Right. I would say I don't have a strong opinion on that. Sorry, that's a bad answer. Which one is the 1903? Remind me. Is that a cock on open?
That's a cock and open. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think I like that.
Yeah, a lot more people do like the cock on open. It seems it's the cock on closes when when you're closing it. There's a lot more tension,
Right.
and
I've used both,
like
and
an
I don't
Enfield.
remember having an Enfield. That's what I was trying to think of, the common one that had a cock on close. Yeah,
Yep.
I
Yeah.
guess I would
Enfield.
prefer the cock on open.
All right.
Okay. In a similar vein, a straight 90-degree bolt or a turn down bolt.
I would say a turn down bolt.
Okay.
I don't have a
okay.
great reason why. I think they're maybe just easier to catch with your hand against the stock, and more importantly, I think they look cooler.
That's the important part.
Well, speaking of
Yeah,
looking cooler, do you like the look of the blued receivers, not Parkerized, blued receivers, or the in the white shiny receivers?
blued.
Nice.
For the World War II Enfield, the number 4, do you prefer the simple spike bayonet or the blade bayonet?
The boring
I like a
spike.
blade bayonet.
Yeah,
Keep
there's a
that
certain look.
spike shit out of here. I like the blade.
Man,
Yeah.
no one likes the spike. I like the simplicity of the spike.
Oh, that's the one cool thing about it is that it was easy to make and cheap and all that, but it doesn't look cool.
Right? You know, the 1903 Springfield originally had a
Yeah,
kind of
that's
like a spike bayonet.
The
I think it was a
ramrod.
ramrod
yeah,
bayonet. Yeah.
terrible. Like a
And then
screwdriver.
I think Teddy Roosevelt, I think, played a role in changing that.
Yeah, because he shit on it. He's like, wow, this is a terrible invention. The guy was like, oh,
Right.
guess we gotta
Yeah.
change that.
And then they added a 16-inch long sword bayonet,
Yeah, right.
and that did the
Hell yeah.
trick.
You want a bayonet?
Uh,
All right, so on a stock, do you prefer the finger grooves or grasping grooves, whatever you call them, or no finger grooves at all?
I would say no finger grooves. I don't
Oh,
typically like the finger grooves as much. Is that a controversial opinion?
yeah,
Yeah,
uh,
most people tend to like them.
yeah.
I don't dislike them, but I guess if I had to choose.
Also on the stock, do you prefer a lighter colored stock, like with a beechwood, or like a darker colored stock with a walnut or something like that?
Oh, I like the darker one. Give me
Yeah.
a black walnut stock like on my M1. I like that all day with some linseed oil on it. Get it real dark. That's what I like.
There you
Yeah.
go.
So, do you love your M block or would you prefer a stripper clip fed?
You know, I like the end block. I like the end block over stripper clips because I've never used a stripper clip that made me think. Um, I feel like there's always some level of difficulty stripping the rounds off, even on the best designed stripper clips, and you just don't have that with an end block.
Interesting. But yeah, I hear what you're saying. Like, I'm using a lot of old stripper clips and I'm never
Yeah,
100% I'm gonna get them all in easily with one push. I'll do it,
Right.
but I'm not always as confident as I should be.
there's usually one
Yeah.
around either the first or the last one. It seems like.
Yeah.
In the end block, you just skip that step altogether, kind of. So I'll take an end block any day.
All right.
All right, now on to sights. For the front sight, do you prefer it to have a protector like ears or like a circular hood, or nothing like that?
I don't have a strong opinion, but I would say I guess no protector. Give me just a simple front sight post.
Now you've shot at night and with poor lighting a lot more than a lot of us. So I've heard that the large ears and the hood can give us little shadow in certain lighting. So maybe you're better off. Like I pick
Right.
ears
Yeah,
usually. I like the way they look, but then practicality, I might want no ears.
exactly. Yeah, I think just a basic post is often the way to go.
And for your rear sight, do you like a peep sight or a tangent sight?
You know, I
Little
think
notch.
right. I think I would go with the peep sight. I don't think I used to like those as much, but with my M1, it's got such a nice peep sight on it, and I've gotten used to that.
Yeah.
So I'll take a
Yeah.
peep sight.
M1's hard to beat.
Right.
Yep.
All right, and for the safety on a bolt action, do you prefer a flag style safety on the bolt or a different kind of safety like the infields? They have the thumb safety to the left.
I don't mind a flag style safety. I guess I would take that. Tried and
Yeah,
true
it's
method.
simple.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Now, for U.S. guns, the BAR or the M3 grease gun, just in
Oh
general.
man. I would say, I mean, if we're going just off of cool factor and stuff, I would go with the BAR.
I mean, you got to.
Obviously, if you're talking about which one I would choose, it would depend on a situation. You know, they both have things they're good at. But if you're just saying one or the other, BAR.
Yeah. Fully auto.
Oh yeah.
All right, and for foreign weapons, how about the SVT-40 versus the Gewehr 43?
Ooh.
You know, again, if you're talking about which one I'd rather own, I would take the Gewehr, but I think the SVT-40 is probably more versatile and I would guess more reliable.
Do you reenact with many Russian units?
No, I do occasionally. I'll go to events and I have a couple friends who do Russian impressions, but they're not typically around as much.
Yeah.
Are there many French or British around?
We do get, yeah, lots of French and British. French, a lot of people at D-Day do French resistance impressions. And then
Cool.
other people will do free French military impressions. And then you see a ton of British impressions of every category.
All right. Would you take a Mosin Nagant rifle or a K98K?
Oh, come on.
Oh, man, I'll take a K98K.
You
Oh,
may
no,
be a
garbage,
Russian
Ron.
sympathizer.
That one's too easy.
Yeah.
And then I guess last up, Carcano or the Japanese Type 99?
Yeah. Ooh.
I guess the Type 99. I don't have a great reason why, but I just think they're cool.
I love Type 99s. Best bolt action in World War II, hands down.
Whoa.
K98 fans, don't at me.
Hot takes over here.
All right, well, that wraps up our Milsurp speed round. And I think we just have one or two more sections before we wrap up.
Yeah.
And our next one is about the other side of reenacting, the enemies, the controversial reenacting.
Uh-oh.
So, how do you feel about like some controversy about people reenacting like Waffen SS units and stuff like that?
You know, I think as long as you do it respectfully and for the right reasons, I think there's a right way to do all those impressions. Because I think that history is some of the most important to teach people about and to preserve. You know, and I think some people hear about people wearing a Nazi uniform and it can be jarring for obvious reasons. But I think when you go to a reenactment and see that it's being done for educational purposes, there's definitely a right way to do it. With that said, do certain people, I'm sure certain people are drawn to that for the wrong reasons and do it, you know, for the wrong reasons or don't do it respectfully. But I do think that's an important part of history to teach about and to keep alive, just like the other aspects of history that we teach about.
The UK got strict about it, and you can't have any symbol of the Third Reich, not just swastikas and any Third Reich. And some events I heard they only portray the Allied personnel, which is I'm assuming is maybe a living history event. Can't really fight too
Right,
much.
that's interesting. Yeah. Yeah, I know that, and even at events here, there are certain things that they don't allow. You know, like I said, we're trying to preserve that history, and we do allow people to have whatever symbols would have been on that unit's uniforms in World War II. We allow that during the reenactments, not to glorify it or anything, but we're trying to give an accurate portrayal.
It's not like the other Germans were good, and just these SS
Exactly.
were the bad guys.
Right, right. But we
Everyone sucked.
do, a lot of the events do have rules against things like flags with that symbol or armbands with swastikas or things like that, because it seems like the people who are doing it for the wrong reasons are often really drawn to those types of things, you know? So that's kind of done to dissuade people from, people who might be doing it for the wrong reasons, who want to come fly their flag around and promote some kind of message. Obviously, we want to keep those people out.
Yeah.
Yep.
Thanks, pal.
And we also found that there were some controversial reenactments as well of like there's a Polish group that reenacted like German war crimes that happened there, which is weird because it's the Polish doing it of what the Germans did to them, but it's still kind of controversial of them reenacting it, like executions and stuff like that.
Horrible.
Right. Yeah, my general opinion is, like I said, there's nothing that is totally off limits. I think if you could depict it in a movie in the right way, there's maybe a respectful way to do some kind of reenactment of it. But, depending on the context or the specific event being portrayed, if it comes off in the wrong way, it can definitely seem offensive, especially taken out of context. Sometimes I see, even just with the D-Day reenactments that we do, sometimes if I post a little clip of a D-Day reenactment online, so many people are saying, oh my gosh, this is offensive to the veterans who actually did that. You're making a mockery of them. But they're not at the event. They don't see the fact that World War II veterans who actually did it are there telling us about their time, and that we're giving all these presentations on the history, and we have a loudspeaker talking about all the terrible things these men went through and all the other stuff that you don't see in that little clip. So I think that can bring additional controversy to some of these reenactments that maybe aren't that controversial if you get the full holistic experience of them.
Right.
And at all the reenactments I've been to, things like, executions, like you mentioned, are definitely not allowed.
Oh, geez. All right, we're almost there here. We talked about the thieves, people stealing,
Crazy people,
and has anyone tried to Rambo and actually just get up and just run ahead and just try to take over the whole event? Some
I've
crazy
never
guy.
seen people do that to a crazy extent like that, but you do get people who definitely want to lead a big charge and they're running out in the open and they think that they're bulletproof or something. But I've never seen people take it to a crazy extent. I have seen people, we talked about how people get annoyed if they think that somebody who they shot isn't taking their hit when they should be. And
Right.
in those cases, I have seen people do things like just stand up in the middle of a battle and walk around while it's going on out in the open, or things like that. But I've never seen people try to just do a one-man army and run out there and take over the enemy themselves.
hip firing a 30 cal as they run across.
Yeah, right. Yelling.
Right. Yeah, I haven't seen that one yet, but who knows? I wouldn't rule it out with some of the reenactors I've met.
The vast majority are serious, is what we're getting here.
Yes. Yes.
And so, do you have some advice for these folks going to their, or us even, for going to our first event, as far as first, like what to bring, wear, like comfortable shoes and shit like that, and then like anything about getting the most out of everything?
Yeah, definitely. So I think my biggest advice about before you go, like I said, is try to get in touch with a group who understands that event and the stuff you'll need, and ask as many questions as you need to make sure you're bringing the right stuff along. And then most importantly is just to show up with a good attitude and be ready to learn as much as possible, and understand that so many of these reenactors have more knowledge than I can comprehend. Some of these guys have been doing this forever. I've
Right.
met so many reenactors who have such an in-depth knowledge of these niche topics and stuff. And occasionally you'll see guys who want to show up and think that they already know it all, or that they know everything
Yeah.
about this unit because they read a book about it or they saw the movie. And sometimes I would say at your first event, you should just, listen. Try not to tell too much and just ask questions, but just absorb all that information. And you learn so much at these reenactments just by talking to the other people there. And if you do that, I think you'll have a really great experience at your first event. And I also think if you do that, the whatever group you're with will be happy to have you back for another event.
That's great advice for your first time anywhere.
Yeah.
I like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah,
Right.
good way
And
to
you
put it.
do.
Don't talk
Yeah, I
that
think
much.
reenacting in general, obviously people to be going out and buying all this stuff and spending all the money to go to these events, you have to be pretty interested in the history. So it can lend itself to a little bit of know-it-allism. But if you can
Right.
put that aside, I think you're in great shape.
Is there any like lingo or tactics or things you should definitely know beforehand? I mean, obviously, like know how to use your rifle and everything like that.
Yeah, being competent with your rifle, and I would say understanding the basic safety points, like don't fire too close to somebody, and if you're ever questioning whether you should be firing, just don't. And obviously muzzle awareness, keeping your weapon unloaded when it's not in use, things like that. But also, let me try to think if there's any lingo. I think FARB is the one term I mentioned. That's probably the most common reenactor term that you'll hear thrown around, and that's just, again, stuff that isn't period accurate. You should know that. I don't think there's any other big lingo that we use. I think anything outside, if you know those basic safety points and you know what FARB is, you'll be all right for your first event.
Nice.
FARB is a derogatory term used in reenacting in reference to those who exhibit indifference to historical authenticity.
Right.
There we go.
All
Yeah,
right,
so
we
it,
got
it can be used as an adjective like farb or farby. Oh, that belt is farb. They wouldn't have had that. Or you can use it as a person, like, oh, that guy is a farb. It can be a noun too for somebody who isn't doing the right historically accurate things.
That's funny.
So I've heard
Tru-
a number of stories about where it comes from, and I don't quite know which one's true.
Speaking of farbs, any recommendation of where to get gear and what are some things that you should definitely not get if you're a newbie in this?
I would
Don't get high-ranking officer gear.
don't get high-ranking officer gear. Like I said, talk to your unit, see what gear you need. In general, I would stay away from the cheap Chinese reproduction gear that you find on sometimes eBay and Amazon oftentimes. It looks really good in the pictures, and then you order it and it looks nothing like the photo, and it's like bright yellow colored canvas instead of the khaki stuff, and you'll see people at events wearing that, and you'll definitely stand out if you go that route when you're getting your gear. So instead of that, I would recommend sites like At the Front, What Price Glory, World War II Impressions, Stand in the Door 1944, places like that that have quality reproduction gear. You'll pay a little bit more for it, but it'll last you a long time, and you won't stand out like if you get that Amazon gear.
That's funny because all the hardcore collectors know you have that Amazon gear on.
Right, right. It definitely, maybe if you're just getting into it, you wouldn't notice. But anyone who's seen that stuff enough, it's like you can tell instantly when you look at it.
That's funny. And so, do you see the future of reenacting? Is it growing, staying the same, or is it fading away, you think? And I know there's
I
controversy
think
over
it's
guns and all that.
right, right. Even despite all that, and maybe I'm somewhat biased because I run my YouTube channel and I interact with a ton of young people who are interested in getting into reenacting. But I think the hobby is growing. I see at these events more and more people showing up every year and more events popping up every year for different scenarios. And I think a lot of
Okay.
people, I don't know if it's because of video games, like we talked about a bit, but a lot of young people are getting interested in history and reenacting, and I think that's awesome.
Yeah,
Cool.
I was gonna ask like what the age distribution is for these events because it seems like there's probably a lot on one side and a lot on the other side.
Right, you get a wide spread for sure, and it really covers the full spectrum. And it kind of depends on the group as well. Some groups you'll see it's all the older breed guys who have been doing this for decades. And there are also a lot of groups that are almost entirely made up of guys in their teens and 20s,
Wow.
which is surprising to a lot of people when I tell
Yeah.
them that there are so many young people interested in this.
Yeah, that's good.
I would think it was mostly the older fellas, but I'm always curious where the 18-year-olds and those young guys, got into it so this far that they're buying stuff. It's a lot
Right,
further than playing a video game.
definitely. Yeah. And I try to be a good ambassador for reenacting on my YouTube channel and try to get people into it that way. And I know that a lot of other young reenactors are doing the same things and sharing it with their friends and posting about it. And I think that's helped
Yeah.
reenacting spread a bit as well. Just getting it out there. A lot of people, if there weren't many big events in their area, they might not have ever heard about it if it weren't for, a post that they saw or a Facebook group that they came across and realized
Yep.
there's a real community where they can do this stuff.
Yeah, and your shorts, like the YouTube shorts, are like a perfect size where you share a nice tidbit. You don't overload everyone, and it's if you watch a bunch in a row, you learn a lot. You get so into it. I know it's got me
Right.
wanting
I
to join. I'm
appreciate
like, oh,
that.
that's awesome. I love that. Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, I try to show that off, and I think the shorts are a good platform, like you said, because there's not a big commitment. I don't think a lot of people who don't know about reenacting would click a 30-minute long deep dive into reenacting if I
Right.
made that. But doing these little shorts that people see when they're swiping through their feed, it exposes a lot of people to this who weren't searching it out or maybe don't even have a interest in history. And they're
Right.
learning about it just kind of by happenstance that I happen to pop up on their feed.
Right. Like I was telling my son about soldiers drowning, like some getting off the boats, and then you had that video on the life belt, the
Right.
M1926 life belt, and
26.
you
Exactly right.
mentioned
Yeah.
that you put it on wrong and you get killed.
Yep.
And but that's like someone sees that opens a whole new interest. I bet people didn't even know that existed. Never mind that they got
Mhm.
killed. So yeah, keep
Right.
doing what you're doing. You could get
I
into
appreciate that.
large longer videos too, but keep your short content too. It's fun.
Right. I've just been starting to branch out a bit more into some longer informational videos like that. And I've put
Yeah.
out a few list videos in the past couple months that dive a little deeper into the equipment and stuff and how soldiers felt about it, which is one of the
Right.
aspects I cover in a lot of my shorts. So
And now
I'll keep
YouTube
making
lets you
more.
link the full video in the short,
Right.
so people can now click it easier and see the whole full video. So that'll work out too.
Exactly.
All right, we got one more thing here.
Yep. Let's
All
see.
right.
Well, we can split it in two. How about this? Where do you want to see the hobby go? Do you want to see like different countries, different factions, different theaters?
You know, I haven't thought much about that. I do think it's good. I have a pretty narrow interest, in that I'm just interested in World War II history, and well, I wouldn't say only, but that's the only era I have interest in reenacting at this point. But I do think it's good that other eras that historically haven't been reenacted as much are getting more attention. There's now a big World War One reenactment community. There are big Vietnam reenactment communities, and I think I'd like to keep seeing those grow, even though I may not have as much of an interest in getting involved. It does make me happy to see that history being preserved in that way, and I hope that that trend continues with more variety in the events that people are having and what's being portrayed at these events.
Cool. if you ran your own event, is there anything special you could think of that you would do? Something that you thought about, oh, that would be cool if they did this.
Or any rules you don't like?
Yeah.
Um, I would say as far as things I would incorporate, I think I would have to think on that. I think the biggest things would be stuff like, tanks or different equipment and things like that that aren't at other events, not because they don't allow it, but because they're hard to get. So of course, if I ran
Right.
my own event, I would love to have a bunch of tanks there. Is that realistic? I don't know, but for the sake of my
Hey,
imagination, we'll say
for
I would
this,
want to
it's
have a bunch
realistic.
of tanks.
All
Yeah. Yeah,
right, a
so I'd
bunch of
want a
tanks.
whole division of armor. I'd want tons of bombers. No, I'm just kidding. Um, but yeah, so more vehicles and stuff like that being put to use. And
U-boats.
right. And I think if I did a public event, I would want to show more of how the soldiers lived on the front lines. Because in my experience, typically at a public event where there's a crowd coming, we're set up in tents like we would be at a garrison, in a camp.
Right.
And then for these tacticals, we're set up in foxholes, manning positions there. And I would like to kind of merge those two, like at a public event, set up something that shows more of how soldiers lived on the front lines, which I think would be really interesting to a lot of the spectators and is often underrepresented at those events.
All right, I
I
like
think
that.
that would be really neat. Thanks.
Yeah, that'd be cool to see.
All right, well, I hope all that happens.
Right, right. And you asked about rules that I might not like. I don't think there's a ton of rules I don't like, but I guess I've been to some tactical reenactments where if you get hit, they tell you to just sit down and take off your helmet so people know you're not in the battle. And I've been to other
Oh,
ones where they just tell you to act like you got shot and play dead for, pretty much as long as you need to and not give the enemy any indication other than that you're not moving. And I think that method is far better. So if I were running an event, I would definitely do the latter.
yeah, it's more realistic.
Right. Yeah. So just lay down where you are, um and I've seen people at those events complain like, well, how do I know to stop shooting at them? And it's like, well, in real life, that you wouldn't know if they're dead or not. So
Right,
you
going back
just
to
have
video
to
games, if they ever played Postscriptum, it's the frustration of not knowing if you hit anybody.
exactly.
It's realistic.
Right, right. So I would want to incorporate that.
All right. All right. So I think we covered everything from the sign up to the wrap up and the dance and the party and our gear and everything. We did a good
Hmm.
job here. If anyone wants to go to that D-Day Conneaut place this year, it's August 15th through the 17th. So maybe if I have enough gear, I'm very far behind on gear. I've put all my stuff into Milsurp firearms, so I have a lot. I have a far way to go. But those places you listed, I'm going to check out and start my journey.
Yeah, please do.
But one day I'll be at
I
an
think
event
you'd
with you.
really like it. Yeah,
Yeah,
I would love that. And if
you
anyone's
sold me.
going to D-Day this year, I'll be there again like I always am. So
All right.
hopefully somebody listening will be showing up there.
Yeah, maybe us. I don't know. Maybe we'll see.
You
That's how
should.
far we get.
Come
It's
represent.
a great time.
All right. Appreciate you coming on and giving us all this time. We kept you for hours and hours. Sorry about that.
Yeah, this was great. I definitely learned a lot because this is an area I didn't know much about.
Yeah, thank you guys. I love talking about this stuff, and it's great to be able to share this with you. And I appreciate that you did so much research ahead of time. You guys had a great plan with tons of great questions, and clearly, you guys know what you're talking about when it comes to a lot of this history and the firearms and everything, of course, as well. So I really appreciate the time you put into this, and I appreciate you guys having me on and giving me the time to talk about reenacting and share it with more people.
All right. Thank you. And your channel is World War Wisdom on YouTube. Definitely go check it out. He's a great
Absolutely.
dude.
And also, I've got the World War Wisdom Instagram, Facebook, and TikTok as well. So wherever
Oh
you like
yeah.
to watch videos, I'm there.
Now I saw that you TikTok was taking down your stuff for a while, and then you started making gun puns. Do you remember your first gun pun?
Wow, that's a real throwback. That was a long time ago. That
I
was
did my
back
research
when,
here.
yeah, that was back before I was World War Wisdom even. At that point, my page was called The Gun Philosopher.
Oh, see, he had gun in
Um,
his title. That was bad. We learned.
That would get
I
you.
did,
Yeah.
yeah. I had a lot of issues early on. It's a miracle I didn't get banned. I feel like
Well,
everyone else who was doing that at that time did. Let me think of my first gun pun.
it was about a type of ammunition.
Oh man.
Sometimes when you debate people, they can't back up their arguments with data. So I guess you could say they are.
Using hollow points.
There you go. You've come a
That's
long
so
way because that
funny.
was definitely in your old videos.
It was. Maybe I should bring that series back.
Please do. Yes.
Maybe the world needs more gun puns now.
Yeah, that was funny. All right. Thanks again. Thanks everyone who's listening and who got through all this. We'll see you guys soon. Kelly, thank you.
Of course. It's always a good time.
All right. See yous.
Bye.
Bye.
They came from a box with other hogs.